Elsewhere, a brutal battle raged and the hero yanked his holy sword out of silence, begging it to wake up and take form. Then he blasted an energy wave straight at the demons. Ishwa, their support, saw just how brutal the hero's Excalibur was, but he also knew the cost was crushing, because it guzzled an insane amount of mana. As the hero kept using it over and over, keeping his mana from crashing became his absolute priority. The fight raged on as the enemy squad unleashed their powers: Magic Sword Gram, Thunder of Judgment, and a blinding Holy Nova. Ishwa fired off his skill, pouring mana back into the magician so she could snap her spells back into action. He wasted no time. He reforged the magic sword on the spot, so the swordswoman could keep tearing into the enemies without stopping. Then he whipped his head toward the healer, clocked that she was still the last with her mana back, and snapped at her to keep healing and stacking those buffs. Thanks to his relentless push, the whole party's vibe stayed sharp, confident, and overflowing with spirit. Ishwa took the weight of their mana on his shoulders and drove the entire party forward, one relentless step at a time. A few days later, Alan the hero declared that Ishwa was banished from the party. Ishwa, the mana porter, got totally blindsided by. With that sudden twist of fate, he fought tooth and nail to accept it. Alan knew the party's mana would run out fast without him, but he shrugged off the worry and swore up and down that the party had never run out of mana. Ishwa tried to explain, but Alan snapped him down mid-sentence, refusing his claim and screaming that he was lying, convinced Ishwa couldn't possibly have that kind of power. Alan seethed with resentment. He couldn't stand Ishwa, claiming he was useless. Yet every time he noticed how the women in the party flocked to him, that bothered him even more. He made it crystal clear. This choice wasn't just his. The whole party stood behind it, together. Ishwa couldn't wrap his head around it, until Alan shoved him out, turning him into nothing more than a pathetic mana porter and leaving him there. As Ishwa kept walking, he couldn't swallow what just happened. Being kicked out of the party wasn't something he ever saw coming. After all, he was the mana porter, the guy who fed mana to everyone whose powers guzzled it non-stop. It was a magic job that lived in the shadows, with him working behind the scenes while the party took all the credit. Alan couldn't cast magic straight up, so people like him scoffed at it and shoved it aside as some worthless gig. The party was packed with a hero, a saint, a sage, and a magic swordswoman, and every single one of them burned through serious amounts of mana. Ishwa realized that from here on out, they'd have to fight and save mana at the same time, and no matter what. That weighed hard on his heart. But if it really was everyone's choice, then he had no power to fight it. As he kept striding forward, a voice suddenly snapped through the air from far away. Someone was calling him senior. As soon as he turned, surprise hit him like a truck. Then the saint from his old party came charging in and wrapped him up in a tight, immediate embrace. Ishwa caught that faint, sweet scent hanging in the air, and without thinking, he tried to stop her in his tracks. Arya, the saint, shot him a look and demanded to know why he'd left them behind. She was in the very same hero party as him and back at the Royal Adventurers Academy. She was the junior. Ishwa froze at her words, then snapped back that the whole party had unanimously decided to cut him loose while Arya struggled to swallow it, because she knew exactly how much they depended on his mana. Ishwa could only keep saying the same thing. This was exactly what Alan had claimed. Arya couldn't make sense of their logic, and her rage spilled over as a dark aura started to gather around her like smoke in the air. Then Ishwa snapped that this darkness didn't belong on someone like her, a saint. At the same time, relief hit him hard. Arya finally understood what went down. Arya confessed she'd come back just to pull him out of it. But the moment she faced the truth, she'd already chosen her path. She decided to tail her senior, step for step, no backing out. Ishwa snapped a reminder that she'd clawed her way into the hero's party. But Arya didn't budge. She refused to stick around with a hero who'd thrown her senior out. She looked back and realized Ishwa had backed her up ever since they were students, and that the person she'd become was built from his support. With that fire burning in her chest, she shot her hand forward and reached out right at. Ishwa glanced at her, then gave the same sign back, just a small like. He was ready to take her along too. He shot a small smile as he took her hand. Then Ishwa couldn't stop thinking. How did she even find him? Arya confessed she'd kept a strand of his hair and used search magic to track him down. And Ishwa practically snapped back in shock, calling it sorcery and grilling her like, "What are you doing, Saint?" Later, as they stroll together, it's like the tension in the air is begging to snap. Arya couldn't stop wondering what would happen next, and Ishua snapped that they needed to reach a nearby town first and prep for the road then. Not long after, a scream for help tore through the air. They spun toward the noise, and there it was, a carriage encircled by monster wolves, while the guards fought tooth and nail just to keep them from crashing in. Ishua didn't hesitate. He surged in to help and snapped Arya to follow, and she practically lit up, like she'd been waiting for him to do exactly that. The coachman jolted at their arrival and demanded why they were here. And Ishua threw his focus into pumping out mana then flooding it, all at once while Arya watched with burning anticipation as they got ready to merge their power. Ishua sized up the scene and instantly clocked those monsters as beer-ganked beasts dangerous as hell, especially for brand new adventurers. But they, even back then, Arya, known as the talented saint, could still handle it with ease. Arya hoisted her staff high and a glowing magic circle snapped into place above them the moment the showdown erupted. Ishua's eyes widened the second he clocked the technique. He instantly recognized it as a top-tier magic form. Arya shrugged off the chant in an instant, then shattered the moment by slamming multiple chant enchantments into play at the same time. Ishua's worry spiked as he realized her excitement had crossed the line, and that brute force still has limits. He snapped a magic circle onto the ground, then started fine-tuning the magic power, pouring mana in on purpose, with an attribute designed to push the circle back. Believing he could cut its output and blunt the hit, he shouted for Arya. Yet Arya didn't even look up, barreling forward on pure focus and launching a double chant without a second of hesitation. As she unleashed the spell called *Innocent Shine*, her staff blasted out a massive flood of holy magic, so intense it nearly stole the breath from everyone watching Radiance, flaring into a blazing holy cross in the sky, leaving Ishua the coachman and even the monsters completely stunned. The monster wolves pack got wiped out in an instant, and even the skeletons lurking deep in that far-off forest got wiped out. A massive wave of holy energy tore through the area, flooding everything with blinding light. After the display, Arya beamed with satisfaction and shoved herself toward Ishua, hunting his reaction to her brand new magic. Ishua snapped that she crossed the line, because the spell had scrubbed everything clean around them and turned the whole place into sacred ground. Arya brushed it off with a light shrug, but Ishua snapped her back. "Don't take this so casually." The coachman, trembling with shock, blurted out who they were. Later, in a nearby village, inside a loud tavern, Ishua leaned in and thanked the man for steering them there, only for the man to wave it off, saying he'd brought them to the village as his own way of paying that gratitude back. He admitted it was his first time seeing magic, this brutal powered up through the transfer of magical power itself. Arya knew that kind of feat should be impossible, but she swore it was her senior's insane skill that let them pull off what everyone else couldn't. She realized she couldn't pull off a spell that huge by herself, because in her eyes, Ishua had an endless well of mana and could lock on to advanced magic the moment he saw it for the first time. Arya lit up with excitement, saying her senior Ishua was on a whole different level as he fine-tuned and perfected the power with surgical precision. Right then, a waitress slapped a bowl onto their table, and the men snapped into action, pointing and shouting that those rough, unrefined Huguenots had no business being served to the very people who saved his life. The waitress bowed her head, apologized, and told them straight up the village had been hit with a mana shortage, so they had nothing else left to do. Ishua's curiosity shot through the roof, and he demanded to know who this man of shortage even was, only for the guy to explain that they were stuck in a tiny village where nothing could run smoothly. They couldn't keep their own refinery going, let alone their farming gear. Their specialty was born from Huguenots, ground through a refiner, but without proper maintenance, the whole system started slipping, cutting production hard until they couldn't even cough up the money to fix their gear, trapping them in a spiral that only got worse. The man dropped his head, confessing that the village might not even make it through the days ahead. Ishua and Arya locked eyes for a quick glance, trading a secret look. Ishua shot up, clocked what was happening, and made his move. If this was a mana shortage, he'd fix it himself. Shock hit the man, but he blurted out a refusal, saying he'd only asked them to show his gratitude and didn't want to keep bothering them. Even so, Ishua stepped outside and Arya quickly calmed him, telling everyone that Ishua had a genuinely kind heart. Soon, they stepped into a building packed with tanks and machinery, and the man pointed out every busted detail, admitting he'd been lying to himself about how awful it had become for years. Ishua stared at the machines, confident he could handle repairs at this level, then slammed his hands onto the equipment and went to work. Unleashed a skill called *full charge. The machines burst to life, glowing with raw magic, and fired back up instantly. Channeling mana into lifeless objects was something else entirely, something wild that made your skin tingle. Something Ishua had been through so many times that it already felt normal to him, because he'd been the one keeping the hero's party's magical gear in perfect working order. By pouring mana into it with dirt-repelling power, he didn't just clean the thing, he brought it back to life. He braced the machines back to life, then tore through the whole warehouse to repair every last corner. The man and the villagers stared, wide-eyed, as the world shifted right before their eyes. Even the rust had scraped off the gear like it had been waiting for someone to notice. Then an old man leaned in and said that one machine was still running on a busted power source. But Ishua studied it, nodded, and decided that with the right mana prep, it could still be used, and he even fixed the broken magic circle, so it wouldn't quit on him anytime soon. Ishua flashed a small, modest smile, but inside, he worried his work still felt rough and unpolished. Time is then one villager snapped in shock, flat out refusing to believe it, because to them Ishua had dumped an insane amount of mana into the gear and even brought fading magic formulas back to life. Like his effort alone matched the combined labor of several top engineers. The man stared in disbelief, then demanded again what the real problem was. Ishu calmly introduced himself by name, then made it clear he was nothing but a mana porter. The man couldn't believe his eyes, replaying Arya's earlier spell in his head, then snapped his focus to her. There was no way she wasn't someone with serious power and status. Arya stepped forward and called herself a saint. The church fully recognized, quiet, polished, and dead serious, like she'd spent years building that calm. Ishua watched her composed face and knew every ounce of effort had been earned. The shy girl who used to freeze around people had finally become someone worthy of the title. And he couldn't forget how she drilled and practiced for it back during their student days. The moment the man learned she was a saint, his mind snapped into disbelief, especially knowing that Ishua was traveling right alongside her. That's what made him suspect Ishua might be the real hero all along. The man snatched Ishua's hands without hesitation, stunned by what he'd assumed, and bowed to him with full, heart-deep respect. Because the idea of a hero paired with a saint felt like destiny. Aizawa whipped around to face Arya, clocked the misunderstanding in midair, and braced for her to slam the truth into place. Arya didn't fight the idea at all. She practically treated it like fate, pairing them up like it was obvious. Ishua caught the change in her instantly, because for a heartbeat she looked downright awkward, like something had flipped inside her, while the villagers threw a wild celebration, swearing the hero had saved their village. Ishua could only watch in shock, as a man demanded a feast right away and ordered their best alcohol to be brought out, cheering for a victory he knew they'd totally misunderstood. The man stared at Ishua and admitted he had no idea what was going on, so if Ishua said things were different, then it had to be the truth. Then another woman chimed in, saying she'd seen tons of imposters dressed up as heroes, but real heroes never brag. Ishua finally got it. It was useless to argue because the villagers weren't about to listen. Later, Arya nodded hard at the idea and said. She suddenly surged toward Ishua, wrapped her arms around him, and blurted out that her senior was her hero, catching Ishua completely off guard as he scrambled to pull her away, utterly stunned by what she was doing. As she clung to him, he suddenly felt something hard pressed into his body, and unease shot through him. Arya tossed it aside without a second thought, like it couldn't possibly matter. Ishua leaned in closer, and something felt off the second he locked eyes with her, and then he clocked it. She'd been drinking alcohol. He quickly warned the man that Arya couldn't handle alcohol and shouldn't be forced to drink, but the guy was already drunk and waved it off like it was nothing still, praising Ishua like a hero. Ishua kept trying to clear the mess up, but every time he spoke, his words got swallowed and ignored. Right then, Arya leaned in closer, and the look on her face snapped Isha into instant panic. Just as he tried to catch his breath, the man shoved another mug of alcohol into his hands and demanded, "A hero drinks too." Meanwhile, way out past the village, the real hero stood before a dark cave like the world was holding its breath. Mythia, the magic swordswoman, froze mid-step, then snapped in panic, wondering if it was truly smart to take on an A-rank dungeon without Ishua at her side. The great sage Raduru warned that moving forward without both Ishua and Arya would be pure reckless doom. Alan's irritation flared as he replayed the pain of banishing Ishua only to watch the others keep dragging him back into the conversation. He brushed off their worries and declared everything would be fine, even if the only person he trusted was someone he deemed useless. And then he snapped. Stop talking. Just follow me. Mithya and Riduru shot each other a quick look, then jumped in and followed him. Alan stormed into the cave, and we all slipped in right after him. And so the tale kicked off of a fallen hero and a mana porter who, later on, would rise into the spotlight as the hero everyone finally knew he was. At the gates of Axe's village, the crowd packed in and erupted in cheers as Ishua and Arya got ready to depart, and the villagers begged them to come back. Someday, meanwhile, Ishua, the mana porter, just let out a small laugh, still swearing he wasn't a hero. Arya, the saint, just smiled sweetly and saw the world through a kinder lens, because in everyone's eyes, he was the one who'd saved their village. Then she snapped her focus to their next destination, ready to move. Ishua made up his mind. He turned in his hero party license and signed up to register as an adventurer in the brand new town of Norbish. At the same time, deep in a pitch-black cave, the hero's crew was locked in a brutal fight against monsters. Alan, the hero, pushed back on his companion's worries about the A-rank dungeon, insisting it was totally doable, even without a mana porter, and even without a saint. Across the world, the Adventurers Guild sorted every dungeon from E all the way up to the terrifying SS rank. Even brand new adventurers could survive E-rank dungeons, but on rank day, the seasoned pros still risked getting erased. Mithya, the magic swordswoman, stayed on high alert. She calculated the mana it would take to get them back, and she couldn't miss that Ishua was nowhere in sight. Raduru, the great sage, warned them straight up that without Arya, they couldn't afford even a single injury. Alan snapped with frustration, baffled that they kept fretting non-stop about Ishua and Arya. He brushed off their worries like they were nothing because he was sure anyone who hesitated in front of an A-rank dungeon was a coward, and a mana shortage wasn't worth losing sleep over. Mithya remembered how Ishua always controlled their mana so perfectly that they never even felt it draining away. She remembered what he once said, the perfect mana porter stayed so sharp that the party never even noticed their mana had been showing. Right then, a monster wolf exploded forward and lunged for her, so she snapped into action, slid out of the way, and drove it down with a crushing strike. The fight raged on, deep in the dungeon's black heart. Alan leaped over the fallen monster wolf's head like it was nothing, sealing its defeat in one bold stride. Believing their crew was so ridiculously powerful, they figured there was nothing at all to fear. Then, out of nowhere, everything shifted, and Alan got totally thrown off, snapping his attention to Mithya. She felt her magic sword acting strange. Mithya finally clocked the problem without Ishua. She couldn't keep that weapon running, and her mana was already screaming at its breaking point. Alan snapped at her, ripping into her value to the hero's party, then decided he'd handle it solo. He called for his holy sword like he always did, but right in the middle of it, he suddenly froze. A sudden stabbing pain ripped through him, and it felt like something inside his skull was getting crushed, pressure surging higher until the pain swallowed everything. Mithya clocked the problem instantly. His mana was plummeting fast. Alan couldn't even believe it. This had never happened to him before. Compared to ordinary folks, his mana tank was massive, and under normal conditions, he never had to fear running dry. But the holy sword, our hero's holy skill, devoured a massive load of mana like it was nothing. Becoming a hero meant the mana shortages were always waiting for him, but since he teamed up fast with Ishua under the king's orders, he pushed this far without ever getting hit by them. Mithya tried to steady himself and see if his legs still worked, but just as he opened his mouth to answer, Bond's eyes snapped to a brand new nightmare. An A-rank lizard man stood right in front of them, and the danger hit instantly. Up to now, those enemies crumpled under him like paper, but this time, something felt sharply different. The creature stopped treating them like danger and started hunting them like easy prey. Alan's composure shattered, and he backed away in a rush. He urgently called for Riduru to follow and shield him, but Riduru hesitated, because Mithya was still locked in the fight. The battle raged on, but Alan demanded they fall back, screaming that if they stayed, every last one of them would get wiped out, and that the hero's survival mattered more than the life of a single magic swordswoman. Riduru froze, stunned by how hard those words hit. Riduru suddenly slammed the brakes, and Alan couldn't help but stare like, "Why did you do that?" She planted her feet and refused to leave because her companion was still clawing for her life. In that moment, she stopped seeing him as anything close to a real hero, because her mana was already drained, and all she could do was cling to what little power still lived in her. Riduru didn't even think. She lunged forward and slammed her staff straight into the lizard man. Alan stared in shock as a sage threw itself into brutal close-quarters combat to back up Mithya, and before he could even react, Mythia slipped through the gap and cleaved the creature's head clean off. She realized Ishua's guidance learning to fight without leaning on mana was straight up priceless. Right then, a bone-chilling scream tore through the air and echoed everywhere. Alan had just spotted another lizard man right up close, and before anyone could blink, Mythia exploded forward and leapt onto the creature's back. She fought to control it, then drove her blade straight through fast. Alan froze in pure shock, while Mythia's moves shouted one thing loud and clear. They weren't about to ditch their allies like he once did. Mythia and Raduru steadied their breath, braced for round 2, gripping tight to the same stubborn vow to push through to the very end and escape together. Later, once they were finally outside the dungeon, Mythia stared into the open air like she couldn't believe they'd actually slipped out alive, and Raduru, utterly wrecked, admitted the fight had pushed them to the limit. Mythia admitted it had been ages since she'd relied on nothing but her sword sheet, gotten way too comfy with her magic blade, and let her basic sword skills rust yet. Raduru still pointed out that her technique hadn't vanished, because anyone trained as a true swordswoman knows how to make it shine. At that exact moment, Alan snapped, questioning what kind of attitude they were bringing to the table on. I can't wrap my head around it. How are they so calm after everything that happened? In his eyes, they slipped back without ever truly conquering the dungeon. He called out that the sage had been beaten into using sheer punches, while the magic swordswoman only trusted a dagger, and to him, that wasn't how a hero's party was supposed to fight. He swore up and down that he was the one who crushed most of the enemies on that road, and he blamed Raduru and Mythia for their failure, leaving both women staring at him in total shock. Mythia called out that Alan had been the first to burn through his mana, but Alan shrugged it off like it was just some badly timed discomfort. Mythia pushed harder, saying that if it was really true, he should be able to draw the holy sword again right then and there. So Raduras cut in and shut her down because arguing with him was pointless. Mythia stared at Alan for a beat, then nodded along and fully backed Radura's call. Alan clocked the way both of them stared at him, and panic crawled up his spine from the look on their faces. Since nothing was going anywhere, Matthias snapped his attention to the bigger problem. Night was creeping in fast, and he urged them to stop and rest in the nearby village. Alan couldn't shake it. He felt the stares lingering, but he just couldn't figure out what they meant. Soon enough, they rolled into Axis village, and an elderly woman greeted them warmly, then proudly served up Hugh nuts as the town's beloved local specialty. Alan steps up, calls himself the hero, admits they've been getting crushed trying to clear the dungeon, and asks for an inn. The old woman snapped in shock. She said another hero had already shown up, and Alan instantly went confused. She lit up when she talked about Ishua, praising him as humble and truly admirable, and then she spoke just as highly of Saint Arya too. Alan was stunned when he heard they'd actually slipped through the village, and he couldn't believe it. How could someone he'd labeled a failure become the one they cheered as a hero? The elderly woman snapped at his words. Convinced he'd just insulted the village's hero, Alan shot his voice up, enraged that Ishua was just a deceitful fraud, even claiming he'd personally kicked him out for making up lies about supplying mana. Raduru and Mythio were stunned to learn Ishua really had been cast out. Seeing their faces twist, Alan scrambled to fix his words, claiming Ishua must have walked out on his own. He shoved right past it and zeroed in on his demands, ordering the villagers to take him straight to the best inn and load him up with recovery and mana potions. Then the old woman pressed him hard, asking if he planned to actually pay. Alan reacted like that sort of outcome was the last thing he ever could have expected. He treated free supplies from the town like the hero's reward to receive, no questions asked, and he truly felt it was only natural for the villagers to step up and help. The whole village froze in shock, and even Mythia and Radura couldn't hide their surprise. Mythia stared at Alan, mind spinning, just couldn't grasp what he was saying. She warned that those perks only showed up under special conditions, and Raduru instantly felt the whole situation twist into something dangerous. The villagers closed in fast, clutching farm tools like weapons, while the elderly woman, empty pot in hand, squarely challenged Alan, certain he'd finally exposed his real nature. She'd sensed from the start that something was wrong, and she accused him of being a fake hero who'd been taking everyone's money and valuables. Alan snapped back, swearing Ishua was the real fraud. But the elderly woman shook her head and hit him with the truth. She remembered how Ishua never even accepted their gratitude and acted nothing like he claimed. Alan swore he was the real deal then, mid-sentence, an egg smashed into his face. Right after that, the villagers snapped, hurling whatever they could at them, chasing them away, and flat out refusing to let anyone insult Ishua. Mithia snapped to the truth, staying a second longer under those conditions was straight up impossible. Alan shot the villagers a furious glare, swearing to himself he'd remember this moment as they backed away. Later, as they pushed deeper into the forest, Mithia leaned in and demanded the truth about Ishua's banishment. Had Alan straight up lied to them, but Alan waved it off and shut her doubts down, saying he never made it up. He just removed someone he believed didn't belong in the hero's party. Mithia couldn't swallow it, because deep down she remembered how Ishua had always been kind to them. She decided they had to turn back, face what they'd broken, and make things right, because she knew clearing that ranked dungeon without Ishua was straight up impossible. Alan dug his heels in and snapped that they were just trying to hold him back, insisting he had every right to ignore them. Frustration burned across his face as he stared them down, daring them to be cut loose too. Mithia and Radaru stay frozen in silence, eyes locked on him as he just hangs there. Alan couldn't shake the thought, did that outcome even matter anymore? Mithia admitted it plain. He knew he always talked like that and confessed that once Ishua was gone, she felt nothing holding her to the party anymore. Radaru hit the same truth too, realizing that if they kept following him, they'd just get dragged deeper into danger, because now he didn't carry himself like a hero at all. Alan finally clocked how dire it all had become. If both of them bolted right now, he'd be in real trouble. He let out a jittery little laugh and told himself, again, that they owed him for being allowed into the hero's party at all. Then he started pressuring them, hard, to stock up on mana potions by any means, because next, he was marching back into the A-rank dungeon. Without hesitation, the two women hurled something at him. The hero party's license. Yeah. That big deal they decided to return was sitting there, daring them to do it. Alan fought the whole timing, arguing it shouldn't go down yet. At least not until he found fresh members, because no way was he losing that pride. He reminded himself everyone across the continent still called him their hero. Mithia and Radaru didn't hesitate for a second. They flat out accepted his claims with icy calm and spoke up, saying they just trusted that whatever he pulled off next would be epic. And with that, both of them spun around and walked off, trapping Alan all by himself out in the forest. As Mithia and Radaru trudged side by side, Mithia couldn't stop asking, what now? Radaru shot back that if they hadn't been left behind, they'd still be out there working shoulder to shoulder with Ishua. She told him she had a detection skill, and right then, by pure luck, she still had a single strand of the issue stuck in her hair. Mithia fired back the same way she told him she had a detection ability too, and yeah, she just happened to be holding a strand of his hair. They locked eyes, both of them, like they were reading each other's minds. Each of them swore up and down it was just coincidence. With their sharp detection instincts, they tracked Ishua's trail and realized he was headed straight for the newcomer's town Nabish. Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, Alan crumpled onto the ground, wrestling with what had just happened, then forcefully told himself he was still the hero. Yet he still couldn't figure out how everything spiraled into this nightmare. Until that thought hit him. He toyed with the idea of getting Ishua back, betting that after getting expelled, Ishua would be struggling and would snatch the chance to return with grateful hands. With that plan locked in, Alan flipped his party discovery skill on an ability that lets him sniff out anyone holding his party license. The outcome pointed him straight to the very same destination, Nabish, the newcomer's brand new town. At the very same moment, Ishua and Arya, they finally slammed into the newcomer's town Nabish. Inside the Adventurers Guild, Arya gripped a status crystal ball, and the moment it started reacting, it burst into a blinding glow. The receptionist stared at the numbers and froze strength at C, attack and defense at B, but her mana and intelligence hit S, and that made her smile like she'd just seen a miracle, because this was exactly the kind of brain and magic power you'd expect from a saint who once walked with the hero's party. Arya shifted her focus to Ishua, called him her senior, and made it crystal clear. Now it was his turn to take over. It all went down inside the Adventurers Guild of Nabish. Arya and Ishua both ditched their spots in the hero's party, then stepped up to register as brand new adventurers. That crystal used to judge power levels, grading abilities from F all the way up to SF, meant average, and anything above earned serious respect, so Ishua pressed his hand against it. And right then, a surge of raw power exploded out of it. That sudden move snapped the whole room to attention. People froze, jaws dropping. The receptionist, totally baffled, fired back. How does a man like a mana porter end up causing something like this? When she checked his status, her jaw dropped at what she saw. The real problem hit hard. His mana capacity had already shot up to SSS rank. The other adventurers couldn't mask their shock. Some of them had never even heard the words triple S rank before. The receptionist hesitated, wondering if the device was glitching, even eyeing another machine to double-check the reading. Yet Arya just kept her confidence steady, knowing the result was true, and knowing from hard-earned experience. I knew one thing for sure. Isuha had never, not once, run out of mana. Her ironclad certainty didn't calm anyone. It cranked up the panic, because a mana porter with SSS-level mana was nothing like what they'd ever dared to picture. A few started whispering that maybe his magic power was basically limitless, letting him fire off abilities with zero limits. And then the receptionist finally made her call, despite. Even with their flashes of real talent and mana that could have lit the sky, they still got stuck with an adventurer rank of C. The receptionist told them point blank that both of them were officially tagged with the rank C as adventurers. The other adventurers just stared in disbelief, refusing to believe someone could jump straight into C rank the moment they registered, while half of them started questioning if ranking up beyond F or E was even possible. Aizawa made it crystal clear, no special treatment, none at all. The adventurers' mood flipped fast. Almost every one of them started calling the two over, begging them to join their party and promising them they'd be treated right. Ishwa got blindsided by the sudden spotlight, snapped his gaze to Arya and froze when he saw her trembling. He snapped to the truth. This was bad because Arya, usually shy, was losing her calm in front of that saint. Threeb, Ishwa tried to slam the brakes on the chaos and told everyone to give them space, insisting that besides Arya's saint role, he was just a mana porter, nothing more, no big deal. Just then, a voice cut through the air, and all eyes snapped to the source. A female knight pushed forward, snapped her finger, and warned that swarming Ishua all at once would only cause trouble. Then the adventurers instantly clocked who she was and greeted her like an old friend. She stepped up and introduced herself as Diana, proudly wearing the title of a sword saint. When Ishua heard that title, his eyes went wide. Then an older adventurer leaned in and told him she was an S-rank adventurer and a member. Lillian's party member, so famous for ripping through Ifrit, one of the 4 heavenly kings who served straight under the demon lord. Diana shot out a quick apology for the whole guild's mess then. Right on cue, a crowd of people barreled into the area. She pushed closer to Ishua, slid her hand onto his shoulder, and asked if he'd join their party, while everyone around them froze in shock at what just happened, right when he realized the sword saint herself had stepped in to recruit him. Isua politely refused, saying he and Arya planned to keep working together for now, and Diana fired back that their leader had true hero vibes and that Izua's skills would be priceless to the team. Arya then started replaying Ishua's pain, how he'd been crushed under a hero who never bothered to see what he could do, and Diana cut in fast, telling her that Lillian was nothing like that. Arya kept pressing, wondering if anyone could be trusted when they wouldn't even show up in person to meet her. Diana paused for a beat, wrestling with the truth of why everything had gone so wrong. Ishwa stepped up with a steady smile, apologized for Arya on the spot, and made it clear he understood her words weren't meant to hurt. They came straight from worry for him. Even though he'd only just met Diana, he admitted he instantly felt she was trustworthy. Because if Diana was willing to back Lillian, then Lillian had to be good to the core. Even after getting banished just recently, Ishua decided to keep going, but only with familiar faces for now. Diana bought his explanation, then shot out an apology for barging in on him so suddenly. As Diana walked away, panic churned in her chest. She already knew she'd have to face Lillian and explain that she failed to recruit Ishua. Meanwhile, Ishua clocked her vibe and could tell she wasn't faking it. Her sincerity was real. In another world, he swore he'd have taken the offer until he realized the party's leader was none other than the hero Lillian. He figured she had to be someone truly extraordinary. Later, deep in the forest, Diana came back, rushed to tell Lillian what happened, and bowed her head with a sincere apology for failing to finish the task. Then Lillian just stood inside a glowing magic circle, staring at a floating teddy bear that was somehow made of magic. Diana spotted the spell's razor-sharp, finely honed structure at a glance, and she knew it wasn't luck. It was proof of non-stop training, even from someone who didn't even hold a magic-based role. Lillian shot her hand up, and the magic circle jolted upward, then vanished in an instant. As she snapped her eyes open, she swallowed the shock, then fully accepted what was happening, acknowledging. Even so, it was obvious Ishua probably had his own reasons. Lillian was a born genius. Everyone called her the hero from day one, and the moment she cornered one of the four heavenly kings, her reputation exploded even bigger. Even with all that power and status, Diana never let it get to her head. She kept training hard, day after day, focused and humble. Even so, being a hero drained almost every free moment from her youth, and time after time her feelings got locked down tighter and tighter. But in that instant, her composure snapped like glass. Tears started streaming down her face as she fought to make sense of it, figure out why they keep shutting her down. Diana had no choice but to stay right by his side, pouring out comfort the only way she could. Diana hinted that Ishua really wanted a face-to-face meeting, so she pushed Lillian to show up in person. Still, Lillian couldn't make herself do it because the thought of it was way too embarrassing for her to handle. Diana couldn't shake it. Memories of her first love still haunted her, and she genuinely couldn't believe that just learning they were both in the same town hit her this hard. Diana scrapped their old plan on the spot, pushed a new idea, and said they should slip into Ishua's quest, the sneaky way, then jump in only when things get ugly. The moment that idea hit, Lillian lit up and agreed on the spot. No doubts, no delay. Diana watched her change happen in real time, and suddenly she lived just like any ordinary girl her age. She realized Lillian had finally hit that point where falling for someone just happens naturally. And with a pounding heart, she quietly wished this meeting would bloom into something real for her. The very next morning at the Adventurers Guild, Ishua pushed Arya to forge ahead, and with that, their fresh life as true adventurers finally kicked off. Inside the guild, the whole place buzzed with energy. Adventurers swarmed the request board, hunting for jobs before anyone else could grab them, and the crowd was so thick you could barely move. Ishua shifted his stance and instantly clocked how jam-packed the whole area had become. While everything buzzed around her, Arya spotted a stack of requests sitting on a nearby table and rushed them straight to issue his attention. While he studied them, the receptionist swooped in and urged them to start working immediately. Ishua nodded. He snatched the requests off the table, and it totally blindsided the receptionist. Digging through the job board, Ishua uncovered missions like mowing down waves of undead, restoring a busted, rust-eaten power reactor, and hunting down a missing cat from the next street over. The cat request lit up the whole area's attention, and her face instantly brightened at the idea. So Ishua nodded too, thinking it was a perfect fit. Then he told the receptionist they'd handle every single request on the list, and she pushed back. "Are you sure you're okay with all of that?" Ishua didn't flinch. That was exactly the kind of work he loved. The receptionist nodded at his pick like it fit him perfectly, but her smile faded when she realized he actually agreed to requests everyone else wrote off as pointless. Ishua didn't get what she meant right away, and her words left him totally stumped, so he pushed for answers and demanded to know why those requests weren't good enough. The receptionist leaned in and told us those jobs were leftovers. No one wanted them because the rewards never matched the grind. Bobbing would actually take them. Ishua saw zero problem, especially because one of the requests was to track down a cat. Later, in a nearby park, Ishua threw his hands up and cast a spell that pulled cats in from everywhere, and one by one they trotted over to surround them. Arya couldn't stop smiling at the adorable chaos. Ishua told them the spell hit cats with a specific wavelength that practically lured them in, which meant only someone in his position could pull it off. Arya, cradling one of the cats, realized right then that there was no one else who could do this. Ishua pinpointed the exact cat from the request, and just like that, the mission got finished for real. From afar, Lillian and Diana watched every move, and Lillian couldn't stop thinking how long would it take to find a missing cat in the first place. Diana admitted this wasn't some magic trick or sword skill job. It could drag on for a whole day, maybe even longer, yet somehow they slammed it shut in no time at all. Soon after, Arya unleashed a holy spell so powerful it lit the whole battlefield. As she mowed down a whole horde of undead with zero effort, Ishua kept pouring mana into her non-stop. Their teamwork clicked instantly, letting them steer through the chaos with total control, and every move screamed how perfectly they'd trained together. Lillian stared from a distance, stunned by how huge the area's attack was. One brutal strike and it mowed down a mountain of undead, so Diana knew right away that only real magic could do that, and that kind of power would burn through a ton of mana potions. She couldn't shake the question. Did Ishua really forge all that mana by himself? Lillian was suddenly sure they'd be needed again later, and soon. Meanwhile, Ishwa and Arya kept hammering through their tasks until they finally finished the filtration work on multiple power reactors, and Ishwa couldn't shake the feeling that getting paid for something that seemed that simple didn't sit right with him. Lillian and Diana kept watching, and they just couldn't wrap their heads around how powerful he truly was. Right then, a pack of men stormed in, shouting that Ishwa was messing with the reactor filtering, and they came at him like they owned the place. Before things exploded, the owners snapped back. Fast, those guys were from a rival company that had been terrorizing the maintenance crews, blocking the work and leaving the reactors stuck in limbo. Tensions flared, and the enemy group surged in to attack Ishwa. Lillian snapped to attention, knew this was their cue, and rushed in to back him up, and Diana fully agreed. Meanwhile, Ishwa calmly snapped orders to the owner, get down and take cover right now. As the crew came into view, he weighed every move too many opponents to pick off one by one, and since they were human, those power reactors surrounding them made big attacks a bad idea. Wide area spells wouldn't be safe in a place like this. With that, Ishwa made his move. Then a tiny smile flickered across his face as he, with his arms lifted, the next heartbeat turned those charging men slammed to a sudden stop. Confusion slammed into them as they tried to make sense of what just happened. Ishwa triggered a technique called the mana ring field, a crazy technique that supercharged the area's mana density, so recovery kicked in faster and hit harder. For anyone who hadn't trained for it, that magic hit like a wrecking ball. Had H's roared, nausea churned, and even the toughest people without a magic roll couldn't take it. One of them fought to stay upright, teeth clenched, refusing to go down even as the effects battered him. Ishwa clocked it instantly. This wasn't some random thug at all, but an adventurer hired to do the job. Figure out how to stop him. Find a safer way without hurting him. Ishwa slammed a raging mana flood straight into the man. The moment that mana surged into his body, sickness hit him like a freight train, and his condition spiraled worse by the second. From across the distance, Diana froze, still trying to wrap her head around what Ishwa just pulled off. Lillian clocked the technique instantly. She saw Ishwa shove mana into the guy so brutally it turned into unmistakable mana overflow. Then the effect slammed harder and harder, spiraling into vicious magical intoxication, and the man soon crumpled into unconsciousness. Diana stayed completely blown away by Ishu's talent. She couldn't believe that something designed to boost mana concentration for recovery could get twisted into a lethal offensive move. In that exact moment, it hit her. Jizua's SS-level magic wasn't some harmless flex. It was the real deal, and it was terrifying. Lillian clutched her teddy bear and locked in on one stubborn belief, that soon they'd finally get a chance to help him. Diana, however, he couldn't help but think at this pace that kind of moment might never show up. At that exact moment, Alan finally burst into Navish, and the moment he saw the town, he knew this was the place he'd been hunting for. Meanwhile, Ishwa and Arya rushed back and hit the guild, and Ishwa greeted everyone like nothing was wrong, calm as ever. But the second his name hit the room, whispers erupted, because some adventurers recognized him as the SS-rank mana monster who kept taking the missions everyone else dodged, the ones with rewards that barely even mattered. Ishwa and Arya marched up to the guild staff, and the moment they arrived, the staff greeted them with a grin, talking about how fast he caught everyone's eye in just a few days. Ishwa stayed humble, convinced they were just misreading him since he only took jobs that fit what he could do. Then, out of nowhere, a booming voice tore through the entrance and announced Ishwa's arrival. Ishwa and Arya jerked around at the sound, and when Ishwa spotted Alan standing there by himself, surprise hit him like a punch. And right away, he realized his old companions were gone. Alan wore a grim, unsettling look as he admitted he'd already thrown both the sage and the magic swordswoman aside, and Ishwa was visibly rattled, stunned that anyone could dismiss people that strong. Alan, still wearing confidence-like armor, declared he had good news. He'd take Ishwa and Arya right back into the heroes' party. That sudden proposal slammed into them both, leaving them frozen and completely blindsided. Alan shoved Ishwa forward, sure that coming back to the heroes' party would have lit up his face with joy, but Ishwa just went silent, no reaction at all. Alan's gut sank as the silence stretched on. Because he couldn't read Ishwa at all, he'd expected him to snatch up the offer on the spot, but that moment never came. Irritation flared in him when the adventurers reacted nothing like he imagined. Then loud laughter ripped through the crowd, yanking his focus straight to it. One of the guys nearby blurted out that they'd already heard about this hero who'd driven Ishwa away. Alan snapped at that comment. refusing to believe anyone could label him like that. Then another adventurer stepped in and revealed the real twist. Ishua and Arya weren't low-ranked anymore. They'd already climbed all the way to key cranks, and that only deepened Alan's confusion, because in his mind, rookies were supposed to begin at the very bottom. The air snapped the moment more voices surged around him, the crowd reacting like they couldn't believe what they were seeing, some gaping at how wildly beyond normal Ishua had gone. Others saying throwing him out of the party just ushered in an even rarer newcomer, and more than a few whispering that Alan was failing now because he was running low on mana, so the deal sounded less sincerity and more like pure convenience. Alan stood with his back to the laughing crowd, jaw tight and rage building as their mockery hit him. He refused to let them ridicule him. Right then, Ishua spoke to him in a cool, steady voice and made it crystal clear. Those he'd thrown away were thriving, and they weren't coming back to his party. Back to back. Ishua snapped his focus onto Arya, zeroing in on the next mission and basically saying, if nobody else has something to add, this one right here is plenty. Meanwhile, Alan just stood there, completely frozen, trying to wrap his mind around what he'd witnessed. The truth hit him like a truck his offer got shut down, and the worst part? Everyone around him mocked him for it. Frustration surged through him as he inched toward his sword, refusing to swallow what was happening. Right when he was about to draw it, a razor-sharp voice sliced through the tension and yanked him to a stop then. Ishua and Arya both snapped their heads toward the interruption as Diana stepped forward, her presence instantly demanding everyone's attention. She made it crystal clear. Fighting inside the guild was a hard no, and if he tried to pull his weapon, she'd instantly square up as his opponent, and her stance made it clear she wasn't backing down. Wondering if he really had the grit to see it through to the end, Alan froze on the spot, crushed by the raw weight of her presence. A wave of pure terror slammed into him, and he couldn't look away, because right then, he finally felt how wide the gap between them really was. He couldn't take it anymore, so he stumbled back. Ishua decided to step back for now, but the second he started to walk away, Ishua shouted his name and stopped him in his tracks. Diana watched his face and realized he never even had the clue about the gap between their abilities until that crushing pressure slammed into him so clearly. Ishua thanked Diana, while Arya teased him as Alan spun around and walked off to leave. Diana flashed a small, shaky smile, because deep down, she'd never trusted heroes, and after everything she'd just seen, it finally clicked. She understood why. Now she even knew Alan's name. She could only hope he wouldn't stir up trouble again. Then everything shifted, and after that whole incident, Ishua and Arya threw themselves back into the grind, snatching up one abandoned request after another, and pushing through day after day. About a week later, both of them shot with surprise when a fresh request landed in their hands. Ishua leaned over the paper, scanning every word, and the job was clear. Head to the elf village, sniff out anything strange, and report it back to the guild for a reward of 30 gold coins. As he mulled it over, something in the deal just didn't sit right, because requests like this usually got swept under the rug since the pay was pitiful for the work. Yet this one screamed, big money. If even battle-hardened adventurers kept dodging it, then there had to be a catch, and the fact that the client's name wasn't listed made it feel even more suspicious. Ishua got tense and held back from dragging Arya into something that smelled fishy, and the guild staff clocked the hesitation right away, pushing him to say whether he planned to refuse. From their point of view, it felt almost too easy. Just head to the elf village, then come back and file the report. Ishua felt that explanation was way off, because if it was really that easy, someone would have snapped it up and accepted it already. The staff held their breath for a moment, then finally cracked and spilled the truth. Turns out the guild had cooked up that request just for Ishua, and when he and Arya heard it, they both froze in pure shock. The guild staff started laying it out, because Ishua kept snatching abandoned jobs again and again. They'd even been debating a special reward for him. Then Ishua cut them off instantly, snapping that it was way too much for someone who'd only been working there a little over a week. And sure enough, the staff had already expected he'd shut it down. So they ditched the usual route, cooked up a high-reward request, then slicked it in under the cover of an everyday, ignored job. The staff leaned in and practically begged him to take it, brushing it off like it was just a casual trip, nothing close to a grueling quest. Ishua stayed on edge, swatting the idea away at first with a quick, shaky wave. Meanwhile, Arya's thoughts spun a whole new way, traveling together with zero pressure, suddenly sounded perfect, and the idea lit up her face as she pictured a calm, peaceful day out. She pushed the idea hard, seeing it as their perfect shot to finally catch her breath. Ishua's eyes widened at her reaction, and when he finally replayed it in his head, it hit him. He'd been so hell-bent on finishing the requests that he dragged Arya into the same grind, day after day, with no breathing room. With a soft smile, Ishua finally accepted the truth. He needed to take a break, and he stepped up to handle the request, ready to acknowledge. They knew he needed to rest, and Arya plus the guild staff looked thrilled. Pure relief and non-stop excitement just lit up their faces. Nearby, Diana sat there in calm silence while Lillian stayed tucked out of sight, ears tuned to every word, and the moment she heard their talk, her eyes lit up. Their next stop was the elf village. She snapped Diana's attention straight to it, so she decided they'd help Ishua right now, no waiting, prove themselves, and win his trust that same day. Diana sat there, replaying the past week in her head, convinced that the two of them never really faced any true danger. Lillian's focus snapped away the moment she reached the guild counter and asked for jobs tied to the area around the elf village. And Diana instantly knew she wasn't hearing her thoughts anymore. So the guild workers started digging through the requests until they found, and at that moment, he only spotted one option that actually fit: crushing the subjugation order for a mutated ogre king. The moment the staff saw it, they snapped into surprise, because it was an A-ranks request, one of the toughest jobs the guild had on the board right now. Lillian leaned in with instant interest at the request. Diana figured it'd be manageable. Lillian strutted in like it wouldn't even be a real challenge, and the guild staff nodded along. Sure, they could pull it off. Lillian's excitement surged as she jumped in to handle the request, and while Diana watched and worried that constantly shadowing Ishua and Arya wouldn't get them anywhere, she still couldn't shake the hope that something would snap into place. Meanwhile, the guild staff stayed perfectly pleased with how everything had played out. 3 days later, Ishua and Arya were rattling along in a carriage, and as the road kept unspooling, Arya leaned toward the window and froze, because in the far distance, the colossal shape of Yggdrasil, the world tree, had finally risen into view. She couldn't believe it. She could spot it from so far away already. Ishua leaned in and told us the legend. There's a sacred tree that's guarded the elven village for 2,000 years, and its power doesn't just cleanse the evil miasma, it purifies it, for real. A power that spawned monsters, and then somehow saved the world. Legend says an angel dropped a miraculous seed into a land that monsters once owned, and from it erupted a towering tree that swept the area clean until the danger faded, and people finally dared to settle nearby and live in safety. Arya stared into the distance, remembering the truth: humans could live on that land only because the world tree made it possible. Ishua let out a soft laugh, clocking how Arya had always loved that story, and Arya's smile sharpened as she clenched her fist, burning with excitement at the thought of seeing the world's tree. Even as Ishua thought back on it, unease crawled up his spine far away. He couldn't pin it down, but the mana drifting around the world tree felt off, like the whole world had gone just slightly out of sync. Still, he forced himself to believe it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. Meanwhile, Diana was battling a whole horde of monsters while Lillian hugging her stuffed toy choked on frustration after she lost track of Ishua. Diana realized there was no stopping this. So many enemies flooded in that even as they pushed near the world tree's base and the main road, the monster wave still wouldn't thin out. As the fight dragged on, Diana felt her strength slip. Her breaths came harder and faster, and the thick miasma choking the air turned every inhale into a crushing weight on her body. Seeing it, Lillian shot up her hand and unleashed a healing spell, and slowly but surely, Diana's condition started getting better. It did bring some relief, but the purge didn't last. Turning that miasma back was only partial. Diana stared at the thick miasma, wondering if it was the reason the monster twisted into something new, and she snapped into action because they had to find their target fast. Right then, something burst into view in front of them, and both of them snapped into action. Diana lunged forward, shoved Lillian behind her, and zeroed in on the thing she'd been hunting, the mutated Ogre King variant, the true target of their A-ranks quest. Diana yanked her sword free, dialed into pure focus, and was ready to end the mission the moment the target finally showed up. As she lunged into the assault, the Ogre King snapped back instantly and blasted her clean off her feet with brutal force. She hit the ground stunned, scrambling to process what just happened. realizing her attacks had totally failed. Lillian stared at the creature's condition, and her eyes widened. Because in some cases, when monsters drown in too much miasma, they don't just survive, they level up into higher forms. The whole promotion thing. Staring the Ogre King down, she realized it had gulped up a terrifying amount of miasma from the air around it. The Ogre King just loomed there, wearing a creepy, unsettling grin like something had already changed in him, and now he'd climbed all the way to an S-rank level. Diana clocked the danger and knew she had no choice left, so she pushed for one opening, betting that even a tiny distraction would do the trick. Lillian snapped into action, lifted her hand, and said it, Lillian. She shot her hands up, and a glowing orb materialized above her palms. Then, in the next heartbeat, the orb blasted outward and forged itself into a wall of protection, sealing off the area like a living shield, because this was the exact power she was born with as a hero. For an absolutely massive dump of magical power, she could fling allies and enemies alike into a virtual world she'd built from scratch, her own locked-in arena, where the fight played out exactly on her terms. Lillian snapped her inherent barrier to life, then molded it into her own fantasy world. Inside that space, they could battle on pure, unfair advantage like a power that screamed, "This is exactly what a hero is made of." She carved out a domain no one could touch, her own flawless kingdom, where reality bent to her will and every plan became real exactly the way she wanted. With the battlefield finally set, she snapped her focus to Diana and made it clear now it was her move. Lillian's power surged out, her hands igniting as she poured that energy straight into Diana, beefing up her strength in an instant. Diana didn't hesitate. Her fire flared hotter as her sword started to glow. The weapon morphed into the most unstoppable blade Lillian could ever imagine, an unreal fantasy sword that could slice through literally anything. Without a single second to think, Diana sprang forward straight at the Ogre King. With one clean strike, he was dead set on ending the whole battle for good. Lillian felt stone-cold certainty the moment the attack hit, believing the fight was already over, and even Diana flashed a quick breath of relief until, right the next instant, everything snapped in an instant when Diana got blasted clean off her feet, and the result was nothing like what they'd hoped for. The Ogre King just roared with mocking laughter, totally untouched by her strike. Diana froze in sheer shock, like her brain couldn't wrap itself around what just happened, while Lillian stood there just as stunned. They struggled to wrap their heads around it, because their combined technique, the very same one that once took down one of the 4 heavenly kings, had been redirected. Diana instantly caught what it meant. The Ogre King's refusal to magic had crushed past even the limits of Lillian's built-up domain. Lillian kept holding the space together, but her mana started to gulp out at breakneck speed. She realized the fantasy world was about to collapse, so she shoved Diana to finish the fight before the clock ran out. With no time to hesitate, Diana clamped her grip on her sword and surged forward again, slashing in rapid-fire strikes to crush the Ogre King, only for every hit to get smacked aside by the monster's massive club with brutal ease. With every clash, the gap in power grew impossible to ignore. Diana pushed forward anyway, but fury surged as her attacks couldn't crack a single opening, while the Ogre King stayed utterly calm. Its face curled in amused, teasing delight. Pure amusement flashed across its face as it shrugged off every strike with effortless ease. Then it snapped into a brutal counterattack and slammed down a thunderous blow, hitting Diana straight in the chest and driving her back as blood burst from her mouth as the force snapped her grip loose. Her sword flew from her hand and slammed into the ground. Then Lillian snapped into action while watching Diana get crushed by the Ogre King's brutal strength. Lillian's focus snapped back to the monster, and she froze as she realized what was happening. The Ogre King loomed over her, sprinting in with death in its strike. Still, she snapped back and refused to even entertain the idea of dropping somewhere like this. She clenched her resolve and told herself one thing: she still had to become a true great hero and tear down the Demon King herself. The Ogre King raised his massive club high, ready to smash it down in one brutal hit. Lillian's mind snapped to Ishua as she realized she hadn't done a single thing for him yet. Right then, a familiar voice cracked through the air. Wrong for her domain. It was Ishua, urging Arya to stay right by his side, but Arya spun in confusion, staring at the strange space around them. Lillian stood there, completely stunned. This space was meant to be her ultimate kingdom. A perfect world she ruled with absolute control. She should have kept that fantasy world locked down, no one in or out without her say-so, but right there, Ishua and Arya slipped straight through her defenses and stepped inside. The moment the sight opened, she froze in shock because she couldn't wrap her head around how they ever slipped into a space that should have been sealed tight. Back then, people smiled at her, surrounded her with chatter, bragged about her genius, and practically begged others to invite her to their parties. But behind those words, softer whispers kept circling. People argued over what hero even meant when her power came just from being born with it, while others mocked her age like it made her easy to sway. Still, she slipped past them alone, cutting herself off from every voice. As she barreled across the courtyard, her steps suddenly faltered, then she tripped hard. She crumpled to the ground as her stuffed toy slipped out of her hands. Tears surged up while she shakily reached for it, clutching it tight as she completely broke down. Just then, someone came up to her like they'd been waiting for the perfect moment. It was chaos in the past now, in the present. Everything's roaring to life. That memory vanished fast right as the Ogre King loomed over Lillian and lifted its weapon to smash her down. Right when everything turned critical, Ishua didn't hesitate. He surged forward, snatched Lillian out of danger, and yanked her to safety just before the attack crashed in. Once they were safely out of danger, Ishua rushed to check on her, and Lillian, still trembling, couldn't help but thank him for saving her at the perfect moment. Ishua clocked her instantly, and memory hit hard. He remembered running into her once before, right near the castle. Right then, Arya spotted Diana's condition and went into full alarm mode, snapping everyone's focus loud enough to yank Ishua's attention too. Seeing Diana hurt left him stunned. Like, how did it even get this far? Lillian was still reeling, unable to wrap her head around how Ishua slipped into her sealed space. Then Ishua tried to explain. Her thoughts sprinted back to what happened earlier, just a few hours ago. Arya had blurted out that she couldn't wait to see the world tree up close. They got shut down at the elf village entrance. No one was allowed in, and only authorized people could pass. Ishua blew it off like it was no big deal, assuming they'd just turn back, not realizing the night was about to flip into something wild. Arya shot up in protest, reminding everyone that the travel guide had promised open tours. Frustration frothed inside her, and the very next second, she snapped, hoisting her staff overhead and blasting out a storm of holy spells that sent the undead scattering, panicking as waves of radiant power surged. A blazing burst of light detonated through the darkness, swallowing the drifting remnants as her attacks kept crashing down. Strike after strike, Ishua watched her like a hawk, and something in the whole situation screamed wrong, because sure, she crushed everything with brutal ease, but every enemy they ran into kept showing up a rank higher, again and again, like the battlefield had already turned hostile, like they'd stepped straight into a demon realm way more dangerous than they ever expected. Arya froze for a second, staring at the sheer force of the enemies she'd just wiped out, while Ishua casually nodded like, yeah, she'd already taken them down with zero trouble. In his head, he couldn't stop noticing how far she'd come. So much that it felt like her momentum couldn't be stopped. Arya pointed out that the miasma had gotten so thick it practically clung to the air where you could see it with your bare eyes. So Ishua snapped into action before anything else could go wrong. He threw his arms wide and snapped on a mana-linked field. The technique supercharged his return to focus, but the real magic was this: it scrubbed the air clean inside its reach. As the field stretched out, Ishua's gut clenched. Something was wrong with the elf village, and he knew it for sure. The miasma had thickened so hard it had already crossed the point where anyone should have been able to survive there. He realized his earlier doubts might have been right, so he leaned forward to study the world tree, only for the thick forest around him to block his view. Still, that nagging feeling wouldn't quit, like something out there was messing with the truth, and that questionable request might have actually been real all along. Suddenly, Ishua felt something off in the air, snapped his focus toward a single direction, and zeroed in like a predator. He leaned in, pointed it out to Arya, and pushed her to follow. She didn't get it yet, but she stayed right beside him. They closed in on the source of the disturbance, and the second they reached it, both of them froze, faces going dead serious. What lab? Right in front of them. Space didn't look right at all. The air felt warped, like someone had twisted reality on purpose. Ishua immediately clocked it as a distortion of space, while Arya couldn't help wondering if it was tied to how the miasma was spreading. Ishua inched forward, lifted a hand, and traced the distortions like a clue. Those patterns weren't random at all. They looked like a carefully built, interlocking magic formation, the kind someone designed on purpose. He stared at the whole structure, and his stomach tightened at what it meant. It was an insanely complex magical configuration, but somehow, he still managed to crack and analyze a piece of it. Right then, the formation split open with a sudden jolt, and a blinding light erupted, forming a massive, glowing eye in midair. No hesitation. Ishua surged forward, and as he slipped inside, he stayed locked on keeping Arya right behind him. Arya trailed them, eyes wide, desperately trying to make sense of that strange space tearing open in front of them. Right there, Lillian stared in stunned silence, because somehow Ishua had cracked open part of her fantasy world. She couldn't even wrap her head around it. Even though she could wield it, then it hit her. His power blew past anything she'd ever guessed, and the shock rattled her to the core. Ishua froze, staring at what he'd just seen, weighing it all in silence. The moment it clicked for him, he realized the space itself was bound to Lillian's skill, so he knew it wasn't linked to the miasmas choking the area at all. When he snapped his focus onto Lillian, he knew it instantly. Only a hero could pull off magic at that kind of scale. Right then, the Ogre King barreled straight at them, and that sudden charge snapped everyone into motion as they scrambled to dodge the blow. Ishua instantly clocked the thing as a mutated Ogre King one that had chugged down a mountain of miasma and somehow swelled into something way more powerful than anyone expected. Without wasting a second, Ishua snapped his hand onto him. He grabbed Lillian and unleashed a full charge energy surge through her like a lightning strike. She restored her drained mana in a single instant. Then the surge of strength hit her like a wave, and Ishua immediately turned his focus to Diana's condition. Arya was right there beside her, hands blazing with magic as she sealed up her wounds, and a gentle glow wrapped around them until Diana finally blinked awake. The moment she opened her eyes, she froze. Arya and Ishua were right there, and she never saw that coming. Right then, Arya clocked it. Diana had sucked in a huge gulp of miasma, and she couldn't cleanse it by herself, so Ishua stepped in instantly and took the burden on his shoulders. He fired his magic again, and a blazing burst of light ripped outward, sweeping the filthy miasma away and making everything around them feel clean. At last, Diana's eyes snapped wide as she suddenly felt her body change. That crushing weight finally vanished, and in its place came a light, steady calm like her whole body could breathe again. Ishua told her miasma was a nasty blend of curses and mana, and all they had to do was pour in opposing mana to cancel it out. Diana snapped her head toward him, eyes widening as she finally realized just how insanely advanced that method really was. Ishua stayed cool and relaxed, quietly thinking through his part, because mana porters couldn't cast magic themselves, so they dug into spell analysis and attribute combos, sharpening new ways to matter, even while everyone treated them like the lower tier. Flames slammed into the Ogre King's eye, and right then Lillian shot a fireball straight from her bare hand. Lillian erupted with yet another barrage of fireballs, but the Ogre King snapped his defenses up at the last second. Everyone froze in stunned disbelief, jaws hanging open in pure amazement. Lillian finally understood. No damage had landed on anyone. She snapped her gaze to Ishua, and her heart surged with one last burst of joy, until Ishua froze, totally thrown off and staring in confusion, while Lillian made it clear the enemy they faced was just too brutal to beat right then. Even so, she wore a faint smile and clung to one fierce promise. She would help him, someday, no matter what, and pride fueled every step like a hero. Ishua stood there, frozen in silence, and when he finally clocked who was in front of him, he knew it. Lillian, the real deal hero. Even with the fear of losing herself looming, she stood her ground because sure, they both wore the hero label. But the truth between them was crystal clear. As Ishua gripped Lillian's arm, he admitted the enemy was insanely strong, but he still swore they'd be beaten. Lillian went utterly silent, stuck on his words. Then Ishua swung his gaze to Arya and motioned. Arya answered on the spot, activating her powers. Wham! Flash of light wrapped the whole group, and they stood there stunned, eyes wide, while Diana stared at her own hand like the enhancement had just rewritten reality. Ishua cut in and promised he'd cover every single mana cost so she could unleash her skills without holding back. With Arya standing there with her eyes closed, calmly channeling magic, Ishua flat out warned everyone she was still going to keep casting healing spells and buffs, and they all needed to stay on guard for those instant death attacks. Lillian gasped as the truth hit somehow. They were nearly invincible now. Diana froze, staring hard at the situation like, wait, can that insane level of mana really last without burning out? Ishua didn't hesitate. He shoved everyone forward, Barking for them to strike and wrapped in radiant divine light, they charged straight at the Ogre King. Diana darted forward first, lifted her sword high and swung with everything she had. Her blade sliced across the creature's stomach, and blood sprayed as it fell. The upgrades hit like a puncher attack finally connected, fighting into the monster, and at the same time Arya unleashed a roaring burst of holy energy, blasting a wave of light straight into it. Her magic crackled with the same sick intensity it always had, and you couldn't look away. And still, even with their combined push, the Ogre King didn't budge, only a shallow cut marred its hide. The beast smirked with a low, unsettling laugh, and it didn't look weak for even a second. Ishwa stared at the situation with icy calm, and he instantly realized that the promoted Newton wasn't playing the same game. This was a whole different level, and Ishwa knew he'd have to change his strategy to survive. He thrust his hands up again, pouring every ounce of power straight into the Ogre King. Diana clocked his moves and couldn't tell what he was planning. Lillian did, instantly, and she realized Ishwa was pouring mana with holy power straight into the creature. Ishwa threw out a simple question. How do you beat someone who's gotten stronger by swallowing miasma? And to him, the answer felt painfully obvious. Diana went quiet as the truth finally clicked in, her understanding rushing in piece by piece. Ishwa then dropped the method, saying the only way through was to wipe out the miasma that had latched onto them. He went on, explaining that once the miasma got wiped out, the creature would start snapping back toward its original form, so the fight wouldn't feel impossible anymore. Then Ishwa turned to Diana and told her, plain and simple, from here on out, stay steady and chip the monster down. One brutal step at a time. Diana shut down the idea of fighting it slow, because once the monster was battered down to that weakened state, she swore they wouldn't need to go easy anymore. Lillian caught the cue instantly and finished her line, realizing dragging the battle out was pointless. Lillian erupted with raw power, summoning a blade so lethal it could slice through anything in its path. Inside the world she built, she forged the deadliest weapon she could dream of. Then Diana lifted her sword to the sky, and a blinding light erupted from the blade. Isua's eyes widened at the sheer, crushing output. This was the real power of a hero. Diana didn't pause for even a breath. She barreled forward and unleashed her attack with everything she had, and this time, her strike finally landed. With one brutal swing, the blade sliced straight through the Ogre King, split its body in two, and ended the whole fight on the spot. After the brawl ended, the tension finally broke as they all huddled back together. Diana shot her hand out toward Ishwa, and the two of them locked eyes and acknowledged each other. She stepped Lillian right into view, insisting this was the same girl she'd talked about earlier, while Lillian hovered half-hidden behind her, fighting shyness as her cool finally started to crack. Step forward, no hesitation. Do it the right way. She forced herself together, still totally frazzled. Ishwa spotted her again from that first run-in at the castle back, when he'd been invited to join Alan's party. And the moment it hit him that she was the hero, pure shock punched straight through him. Lillian felt her heart slam in her chest the moment she realized he still remembered her. Watching her closely, Ishwa realized she was even more guarded than Arya. Diana wasted no time and snapped back to the real issue. She pointed out just how strange that miasma was earlier, especially with the world tree so close by. So she decided they'd swing back to the elf village one more time to dig deeper, and Ishwa nodded if this was some kind of hero. Maybe they could finally piece together what was going on. But when they looked ahead, every single one of them went stone still at what they saw. For them, it was worse than they feared. Yggdrasil, the world tree, was starting to wither. Lillian snapped the moment into motion, pushing everyone to hustle and charge straight for the elf village. As the thoughts hit him, he realized this was exactly what you'd expect from a real hero. Because when trouble struck, she stayed rock solid. At the entrance, the gatekeeper clocked them instantly, and his face lit up with recognition. Realized it was the very same crew he'd seen back then. Lillian stepped forward and declared herself the hero, showing her ID and saying they'd come to investigate the lands around the elf village. The gatekeeper froze with hesitation, like she couldn't decide if this time was the real deal or just another lie. He sounded worried as he said, ever since that guy claiming to be a hero showed up, everything's felt off, and he couldn't shake the fear that she was just another imposter. Ishwa reassured him they'd handle it, and the guard finally handed the whole situation over to them. As they bolted forward, Ishwa couldn't even believe they were about to barge through the elf village in this crazy rush when he and Arya had planned to stroll in easy and take in the sights. As they neared their destination, the elf council members were already waiting up ahead, right when they caught a frantic voice shrieking in panic, over and over, that it didn't know. Arya and Ishua instantly clocked who it was, and their eyes popped wide. As they inched closer, they spotted the elf queen encircled by her council, while Alan stood right beside her, hands up, covering his ears. A few days back, the king hauled Alan the hero into his presence and demanded he come back with a full report of all his victories. Alan gritted his teeth with pure frustration, seething at the fact they were calling him to report when those useless fools had already bolted. Locked in Nabish, he finally got the summons, and when it landed, he tore back to the royal capital. At the Grand Assembly, the royal herald shot his hand up, loudly praising him as a world-famous top-tier hero recognized straight by the king himself and bragging that his latest victories must be nothing short of extraordinary. She brought up another hero, Lillian, who'd already crushed Ifrit, one of the 4 heavenly kings that serve straight under the demon lord. And with that, Alan felt pushed to fire up his report. Then he froze, hesitation hitting him like a sudden wall. The report said his power had only bumped up a little, and the royal herald's reaction shot straight into shocked disbelief. Alan then admitted he's in the middle of taking down an A-rank dungeon, and he's pushing to finish it fast so he can jump straight into an S-rank one next. The king's anger snapped through the room as he slammed the debate to a stop, roaring that he was sick of the same tired reports. Then he demanded to know where Ishua was, promising he'd finally hear the real story straight from him about how they finished that dungeon. Alan snapped with irritation, his mind racing as he wondered why they'd dragged his name into it right then. A cold unease crawled in because if everyone found out Ishua was the only one left in the party, no one could predict how the others would snap. Alan told the king that Ishua wasn't feeling right, and the king immediately snapped into worry, grilling him about exactly what was going on. Alan kept going, telling everyone, "Arya's right here with me. I'm just resting and taking it easy, so don't worry." Sweat broke across Alan's face as he gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to snap a real answer because inside his head, all he could think was, just get through this. If he could pull off results by the next report, he was sure he could claw back his standing. The king kept his eyes locked on him, like he was daring him to blink first. Alan clamped his eyes shut as the pressure crushed down on him, and the royal herald shoved the matter along, calling him Hero Alan once more. The king shoved an urgent quest into his hands, ordered him to talk it over with Ishua first, and then move on with whatever came next. Later on, the carriage rattled down the road, rolling toward whatever came next. Alan's eyes locked onto the horizon. There it was. Yggdrasil, the world tree towering so far beyond his wildest expectations that it nearly stole his breath. As Alan stared out the window, he replayed what he'd heard promoted monsters were supposed to show up around here, but somehow they'd gone the whole time without running into a single one. Suddenly, he slammed his fist into the carriage roof and yelled at the coachman, demanding to know if those monstrous legends really crawled out from around there. The coachman nodded and admitted those reports really had come in, then explained the area was shut down right now because of it. Alan scrambled onto the carriage roof, staring down and thinking about it right before the closure. Lillian, the hero, had launched her quest with no clue what was coming, and he laughed it off, brushing away the notion that she was any kind of rising star as pure nonsense. The coachman shot a shocked look and blurted that he'd heard she was noble, strong, and stunning while Alan waved it off, convinced she only looked tiny and forgettable. Alan stewed over it and decided he had to help that famous carefree hero who just marched into a deadly zone, so he pictured Lillian and the swordswoman right at his side, convinced that if he could figure out what was causing the chaos fast enough, every brutal mistake he'd made before would finally vanish. Perched on the carriage roof, he told himself those vicious monster rumors had to be wrong, so this would be a breeze. And for the first time, it felt like luck was finally on his side. With a razor-sharp glare and clenched teeth, he seethed that none of this had to be so messy. If only things had gone differently, and he aimed that rage straight at Ishua. At last, he finally stomped into the elf village and somehow made it there without a single incident. An elf intercepted him mid-step, jabbed a finger to the side, and said a new human just showed up, because nobody gets in unless they've been given permission. As Alan stormed up the stairs, he couldn't stop wondering if Lillian came here too, so he cornered the gatekeeper and demanded to know if she was around. But the gatekeeper shot back, grilling him on who he was. Alan shoved his ID forward and snapped, "I'm a hero. My mission was handed down by the king. I'm here to investigate." The gatekeeper stared at the hero moving solo and couldn't hide his shock, wondering if anyone could pull off such a thing at all. Right then, the door burst open and the girl waved him inside. She shot forward, flashing confidence, and introduced herself. Chelsea, the elf queen. In Alan's mind, the queen popped into focus and she was downright adorable. The elf queen snapped that this couldn't stay buried forever, and since there was no answer on the horizon, it was time to swallow pride and team up with the humans. She warned it could spiral into a world-shaking turmoil and begged him, don't act reckless. In his head, Alan couldn't shake the doubt. Was it really that serious? And was he even capable of handling it? He replayed the king's earlier words in his head, then clenched his teeth so hard the frustration nearly snapped them. He chose to hear their whole story first, and if things turned out to be too dangerous, he'd vanish without a second thought. As Alan marched through the elf village, he clocked every detail of how the elves were doing. In his head, their faces looked bleak enough to make his stomach drop like. Was it really that bad? He snapped, demanding to know what happened to Lillian, since he figured other heroes should have shown up before him. Then the elf queen shut him down fast, saying he was the only human who'd entered the village lately because the area was locked down. In his head, Alan panicked Lillian wasn't there, and he wondered if he should go hunting for her first. Then it hit him. He remembered the royal herald lavishing praise on Lillian, praising how she conquered Ifrit, one of the demon kings under the heavenly kings who stood in direct command. With a grim look, he knew this was his shot. If he handled the mess himself, the king wouldn't have any choice but to recognize him. Then Queen Chelsea guided him on. And right away, he realized they'd finally arrived. Alan snapped his gaze upward, and there it was, the mighty world tree, Yggdrasil, looming over everything. Seeing it up close, it smashed his senses with sheer size. And then he realized the roots were rotting right under the surface. Queen Chelsea snapped that Yggdrasil was bleeding life fast, and the miasma purification wasn't going even close to how they planned. As he watched her, Alan couldn't shake the thought monsters were escalating fast, and they were getting downright vicious. He suddenly feared that if things kept going like this, the whole region could turn into a dead zone. And he couldn't stop wondering if there was anything at all he could truly control. Queen Chelsea grilled Alan, daring to ask if he could even handle what was coming, and in his head, Alan decided the smartest move was to cook up a believable excuse and slip out. Alan kept his face calm and said he'd only come here to investigate. Alan replayed how the royal herald snapped back and doubted that this was all. Then he remembered the king's face twisting with anger as he demanded answers, where that bastard was, and how there was no issue. Alan dropped his gaze, and Queen Chelsea caught the shift, then demanded to know what was wrong. Alan straight up confessed, "Yeah, I'm a hero," then demanded they hand the whole problem over to him. In his head, he realized he'd already said it, but he still sold himself the lie that it was the only shot to claw back his reputation. And Queen Chelsea snapped into action, firing off urgent questions like, "Can you really handle this?" Alan nodded with confidence, insisting he could, because he was a hero. Then he lunged forward like there was no turning back, convinced it was just a tree sprinkle some healing magic on it, and it should bounce right back fast. Queen Chelsea flashed approval, and one elf council member shot back that even their own work under Project Yggdrasil couldn't fix it. When Alan heard that, he snapped around so fast, it was like his thoughts had hit the brakes. Because in his mind, he knew even a specialized crew of elves couldn't fix what was wrong. Simple recovery magic wouldn't cut it, but he still threw out his hand and touched the world tree. In his head, he mapped out his next move, and threw down the decision right on cue, like a trigger getting pulled cast. A top-tier recovery spell that could mend even injuries so deadly they should have ended his life. With blazing focus, he steadied himself, remembering how he'd handed the healing duties to Arya before, because not everyone even knew he could do it. And deep down, a quiet pride swelled as he proved he could wield healing magic while still standing as the vanguard. Suddenly, the tree split with a brutal crack and a chunk tore straight off. Alan got blindsided, and Queen Chelsea snapped into shock. She couldn't believe it because even basic healing magic wouldn't touch what just happened. Staring them down, Alan insisted he already knew all of it and swore his moves were just careful preparation. In his head, he raced to one grim idea. If the tree was soaked in miasma, then maybe it wasn't just sick, it was an abnormal case that could be treated. He reached for the tree once more and hurled spells that bandaged his wounds and purged the poison from his body. The Elf Council and Queen Chelsea stared at him as their hopes strained away, unsure if this was really what a hero was meant to do. Some snapped that if those tactics were truly enough, they wouldn't have fought this long. While another insisted miasma wasn't some random sickness at all, but a twisted blend of curse and mana. Hearing it, Alan clenched his teeth so hard it felt like his jaw would crack, and in his head, he instantly shot the whole idea down. Because what was he even going to tell the king if he came back empty-handed? When he leaned in and stared at the roots, he realized they were the only things swelling out of control, and their ugly discoloration screamed that they'd gulped down a ton of miasma. Then he yanked his sword free, once it was in his grasp. His thoughts snapped into place, and he swore he finally understood what was really going on. He declared the fight was done, then geared up to show what a real hero could unleash. Queen Chelsea snapped into action and demanded to know what he was really up to. But Alan waved the concern off and barreled forward. With a fierce lift of his sword, he summoned a holy blade into existence, and it finally appeared right in front of him. It blasted a blinding glow into the air right before it slammed into the tree. The Queen and the Elf Council just froze in pure, jaw-dropping shock. Queen Chelsea's eyes went wide with alarm. Something had gone horribly wrong, and Alan swore. He cleared out the miasma's source, convinced it had been piling up right there and fueling that abnormal growth. But then his eyes went wide when he spotted something he never expected. A choking miasma seeped through the trunk, crawling outward like it owned the place. The Elf Council froze in shock, while Queen Chelsea dropped to her knees, breathless, finally realizing just how dangerous things had become. She could feel it. Yggdrasil was dying, and she knew it for sure. In her crushing heartbreak, she realized those roots weren't the culprit at all. They were the tree's own shield, its last stand against the miasma. Alan spun around in pure shock as his hands finally locked onto. The moment her realization hit, hard, the Elf Council piled in one voice at a time, grilling his every move and denouncing what he'd done. And a few even whispered that he must be working for the Demon King while Alan shut it all out, turning away from their accusations and insisting, in his heart, that he never knew. Overwhelmed to the bone, he clapped his hands over his ears, choking on the fallout of what he'd done, and he kept whispering that he never had a clue, because somehow he'd figured out he knew nothing at all. Then, like a lightning bolt, he realized it wasn't his plan, because right out of nowhere, a voice shouted, and everything snapped into place. Alan froze the second he clocked it. Teeth grinding, he spun toward the voice and froze when Ishwa appeared right in front of him. Ishwa snapped his voice as he shouted at Alan, furious over what had been done to the World Tree. One of the Elf Council members snapped, saying the hero had hacked off the roots that were choking the miasma. Hearing that, Ishwa snapped forward on instinct. Stunned, he couldn't even make sense of why someone would pull a move like that. Queen Chelsea spun her focus to Lillian and demanded to know who she really was. Lillian stepped forward and called herself a hero, then locked eyes with Chelsea and realized she was the Queen of the Elves. She dropped her head like the tears were seconds away, and Queen Chelsea couldn't ignore the truth this crown meant next to nothing now. If she couldn't shield Yggdrasil and the elven village fell, then she'd lose the right to call herself a queen. Lillian refused to swallow that ending, and she pushed into action fast. She snapped her eyes up and swore it was still way too soon to sink into despair. Meanwhile, Ishwa pressed his hand to the World Tree and shut his eyes tight. Ishwa snapped to the truth that the World Tree was still alive, then begged for one chance to heal it. Queen Chelsea hesitated with uncertainty, while one Elf Council member snapped back this disaster was already here because they trusted humans, and they refused to bet their future on someone they didn't even know. Lillian leaned in close to Queen Chelsea and whispered that Ishwa was still a brand new adventurer and nothing more than a maniporter. She trusted him with all her heart, even when everything said she shouldn't. She was dead sure he'd grow into the kind of hero who could actually save the world. Queen Chelsea halted mid-breath, weighing every word like it might explode. Then she snapped her gaze to Ishwa, and then she made a hard, fearless call. She trusted him, and she bet everything on the strength of his resolve. The Elf Council hid her decision with pure shock. Queen Chelsea stared in dead silence, knowing that if she did nothing, Yggdrasil would surely die, and she chose to act, not freeze. Then she snapped her finger forward and ordered Alan's capture. Two elf guards lunged in and pinned him down as he fought back, but Alan screamed for Ishwa to save him, begging as their leader, and that plea got shut down cold. In his own head, Ishwa swallowed the crushing weight of responsibility and pressed his hand against the tree one more time. A faint glow snapped around him. Just like he feared, mana started to lurch and wobble, because the miasma's impurities were smashing up its whole circulation. The miasma was spreading too far just. Trying to cleanse it wouldn't cut it, because the world tree would collapse long before that worked. He understood the truth. The severed piece that once sealed the miasma had to be put back. So, to make it, Ishwa slammed his will into the world and created a manhole. The Elf Council stared in stunned silence as a warped magic circle twisted into existence right before their eyes. Black energy surged into its core, swirling tighter and tighter like he was yanking the miasma in with it. Ishwa realized the circle had warped into shape because the dark mana was painfully scarce. If one attribute's mana is packed tighter than the other, the denser magic just surges right into the emptier flow. So this rule was first used to siphon mana away from monsters. Then Ishwa scattered a bunch of mana holes around Yggdrasil, yanking the miasma in at a brutal, lightning-fast pace. Ishwa then barked at Lillian to draw matching magic circles right where the miasma was thickest. Miasma wouldn't stand a chance, and Lillian snapped into action, rushing to follow his orders without wasting a second. While Ishue admitted he couldn't reach those higher spots on his own, Lillian's mind latched onto the second her name got called. Boom. Her heart started hammering like crazy. Gliding near the top of the world tree, she zeroed in on carving out the magic circles, and once she started, lining them up one by one felt weirdly easy until she felt Ishua's mana control, and it practically looked miraculous. Soon, a fresh black vortex tore open right at the heart of her magic circle. Then, hovering before the massive tree, she froze in awe, because she'd never even imagined a method like this was real, and deep down she knew it could actually work. Queen Chelsea stared in stunned silence, struggling to wrap her mind around everything he was doing. Ishu flashed a quick glance up with a faint grin, then dropped his eyes again, thinking, "Yeah, I'm just a mana porter." He snapped at Lillian to keep pushing, his eyes locked on the job, and then boom, one of the elves screamed in panic. Queen Chelsea wasted no time. She grilled the situation, convinced they'd finally stumbled onto a flicker of hope. Then another elf burst in with shocking news: the elven village was getting crushed, monster after monster pouring in. Shock rippled through them as the truth hit. This wasn't a normal outbreak. It looked like it could have turned into a stampede. Lillian realized the world tree's power to cleanse miasma had fully died out, and the monsters snapped into even more violent, non-stop action. While Ishua kept working, the truth hit him like a punch. If he stopped the treatment right now, the world tree would die. No space existed to move. Diana clenched her sword in both hands, nowhere to go but forward. She let out her relief the only way she could, scared they'd just stand there and do nothing. Still locked in, Ishua handed Diana and Arya the job of stalling the monsters, because he knew that once the world tree came back, the beasts would lose their bite again. So Diana shot out right away to meet the threat head-on. Outside the elf village, Diana studied the defenses like a hunter, and when she confirmed that the barrier sank deep underground, she snapped into action and geared up right beside Arya. Right ahead, a massive pack of monsters swarmed toward the village, squeezing in closer and closer, and Diana realized this was their first time teaming up. Meaning, while the forest filled with monsters, the archers stepped up and cut them down. Diana stared forward and decided to lean on the elves' archers for backup while they kept their eyes locked on the road ahead, ready to defend it to the last second. Arya lifted her weapon, and that sacred light flared bright, blasting out a devastating strike that drove straight through the monster's body. Diana watched Arya's strength up close and couldn't believe it, how much power she could unleash even without Ishu backing her. The clash raged on when an elf burst in, slapping down the last mana potions they'd managed to scrape up from the village. And that was all there was. Arya snatched them instantly, thanked them fast, and got ready to put every drop to use. Meanwhile, Diana stood inside a magic circle that shielded her from harm and boosted her sharpness and defense. But Arya warned her that those upgrades wouldn't last without Ishua, so she better stay sharp and careful. Diana then bolted straight into the battlefield, slicing through the oncoming monsters with sharp, no-nonsense strikes. Arya kept blasting from afar, unleashing pure, overwhelming force with every single strike. An elf guard watching the scene spotted the hero's companion's jaw-dropping strength, but he still, no one knew if they could stop that crushing tide of enemies. He stared straight ahead at the endless wave of monsters charging toward them. While everything raged on, Ishwa and Lillian kept hammering at their plan to bring the world tree back, slamming the monohole technique again and again as they worked through its massive guts until Ishwa finally understood just how colossal it was and Lillian pointed out that only a handful of areas were left. In his head, Ishua kept urging Arya and Diana to hang on just a little longer. On the battlefield, a wild rabbit exploded onto Diana's side and scraped her arm with its horn, ripping open a nasty wound. Then Arya shot in and sealed it up in a flash. Diana shot them a grateful nod, then kept hacking through the monsters crowding in around them only to realize the fight was grinding her down faster and faster. Arya then tore through the potion stash and realized every single mana potion was gone. And as they pushed on, the miasma kept piling up, choking the air thicker and thicker. Pressure kept climbing as they fought tooth and nail to stop the monsters from tearing through the walls, cutting down every threat they could see. Reinforcements still hadn't shown up, and the outcome hung in the air, brutally uncertain. Even so, Diana bolts into the fight to hold the line as long as she can, clinging to one hope: the world tree will recover. Inside the elf village, an elf woman dropped to her knees before Queen Chelsea and snapped that the enemy had already smashed up to the fence and the break-in was just hours away. Queen Chelsea shot back, demanding the evacuation plan, and an elf man hurried in to report that the citizens had already started slipping out through the back entrance. With a grim face, Queen Chelsea stared at the mess ahead and realized the truth. Sure, the miasma was slowly getting dragged out, but the monsters would probably crash the party first. She snapped her command: get every fighter to the gate, call this an all-out war, and demanded her bow. But the elf council members shot her down, insisting she stay back and not go herself. Meanwhile, Ishua stayed locked in with his eyes shut, and in his mind he felt the miasma thin out, while the mana's flow slowly roared back. He was convinced that just a bit more effort and everything would finally click. Outside, Diana took a brutal hit to the thigh. Arya snapped into action without even a second to hesitate. As she shut her eyes to cast healing magic, a sudden spike of pain ripped through her, and she clutched her head, unable to finish the spell. Diana snapped to it. Arya was out of mana, and she barked at the others to drag her to the back before it all fell apart. With pain screaming through her wound, she snapped her gaze forward and saw the monsters keep coming, pressing in toward them with zero pause. Up ahead, an elf archer broke the news. He said the wall wouldn't last much longer. Diana locked eyes on the road ahead then. Her mind went totally blank for a beat. She swallows the fear, tightens her eyes, and stares straight at the brutal reality. She clenched her sword tighter and realized it again. She was being shoved to the brink, even as the Sword Saint, forced to face the possibility of death all over again in the very same day. She realized that if they even made it out alive, they'd have to restart their training from zero, and her mind immediately snapped back to Lillian. Sensing she was probably trapped in the same kind of trouble, she knew this was the exact moment when Ishua's presence would have changed everything, and right then. Then out of nowhere, two shadowy figures dropped from the sky, and she crashed straight into the monster swarm, and one of them brandished a magic blade called Graham, swinging it through the horde and cutting down everything around her. While she lifted her staff and ripped a wave of lightning across the battlefield, she unleashed the attack called Thunder of Judgment. Everyone watching froze in shock, eyes stretched wide at the sudden twist, and Diana scrambled to wrap her head around the way everything just crashed in. As Arya clocked the shapes, she instantly pegged them as Little and Mythia. A few weeks back, Alan's party tried and failed to crush an A-rank dungeon, and after that, Alan stood tall and got crowned a hero across the whole continent. Then Mythia and Little ditched the party and walked away. They were basically saying, we're just gonna wait in line and watch what he does next, because his future wins are gonna be legendary. Alan got left stranded alone in the forest, completely cut off from everyone. Mythia and Little kicked off toward Ishua, burning with the plan to follow him. Then, out of nowhere, they heard desperate cries for help tearing through the air. They stumbled on a carriage getting shredded by goblin-like monsters, but these fiends had wings, so they swooped and attacked from the skies. Mythia insisted they make sure the highway stayed safe and properly maintained, while Little shrugged and pushed to head straight for Nabish. Still, both of them were sure of one thing. If Hua showed up, he'd never turn a blind eye to what was happening. After everything they'd survived these past few days, they felt a wild itch to break free and move on their own. Once the monsters were crushed, Little froze, completely baffled by what came next. Inside the carriage, she suddenly realized that, even though they were desperate to reach Nabish fast, they were suddenly forced to ride the exact opposite way. Mythia nodded, realizing they couldn't just ditch the passengers because all their escorts were already wiped out. They chose to send them off safely first, then they headed toward Nabish to keep the mission moving. Later, deep inside a lavish dining room overflowing with juicy meat and fancy delicacies. No one could shake the feeling. How did they end up here, stuffed into luxury like this, and somehow still digging into a feast this lavish? An elderly man broke into heartfelt gratitude, thanking them for saving the day, realizing they'd just saved his daughters. No one saw it coming by the end. They didn't just win. They also saved the Lord's daughter, who'd been wasting away from a cruel illness. Little jolted to his feet, desperate to run off. Then the Lord demanded, "Wait." He dangled a job offer working for him as live-in escort, saying he'd been waiting to find people with their skills. And when Mythia turned him down, she thanked him with all their hearts, then admitted they were just humble adventurers who couldn't imagine working under a noble. The Lord demanded they stay at least one night, insisting it would be downright improper to let the people who saved his daughter's life walk away after just a meal. Little and Mythia shot each other nervous glances, then finally nodded and agreed to his request. Later, Little once again stared at everything that happened, and couldn't wrap her head around how it all went so wrong. They kept getting begged to just stay one more night, and somehow before they even noticed, an entire week had vanished. Mythia also blurted out that she couldn't wait to rush to Nabish. While staring at an unruly strand of hair, Little figured she'd been camped in Nabish for a while, so she finally let her guard down. The very next day, the Lord personally saw them off, grinning and telling them they'd always be welcome back in his territory anytime. Mythia and Little beamed in return, then set off. Little couldn't stop thinking about it. This was finally the moment she'd reunite with Ishua, but later she suddenly got completely lost again. Like her mind couldn't find the path. Inside the guild, Mythio nearly choked on his surprise when the receptionist told him Ishua wasn't there. Nobody realized they'd grown far too comfortable. The receptionist leaned in and told me Iswa had vanished toward the elven village after he accepted a special request from the guild. Hearing that, Mythia snapped to a decision she'd hunt him down, and she and the others bolted from the guild with barely anything to take. Soon after that, the king slammed out an order banning anyone from entering the ring of land around the village, and that left both of them rattled. Little still wanted to tail Ishua, but she knew the king's orders brooked no argument. They had to obey. Mythia, though, refused to stand around and do nothing. She clocked that Ishua had swallowed every last request before he left, and the receptionist backed it up. Then Mythia stared at the table, packed with pending demands, and stopped mid-sentence, and they chose to step in for Ishua and the others while everyone was away. Later that day, Mythia and Little tore through a stack of quests, slaughtering undead, tracking down a missing puppy, hauling deliveries, and even pitching in to help watch the village kids. When they finally slipped back into the guild, they demanded to know what quests were still hanging unfinished, and once they got the list, they wasted no time, taking over the leftover jobs one by one. Mythia pushed Little to keep fighting forward, betting that once Ishua finally came back, he'd have no choice but to admit what they'd done. The very next day, Little was right back to square one, totally clueless about what was going on. The two of them were soaring through the sky on the back of a massive bird, like the world had just become their playground. Little shouted for Mythia, and then, out of nowhere, his eyes fluttered shut as he fell asleep, which totally blindsided Mythia. She stared at how it all spiraled into this, and Little shrugged like it was nothing. Mythia was the one who'd been sleeping too much. While they were hunting for Reinjetsu herbs, that brutal bird swooped in and attacked, so Mythia remembered too that things like this, that pattern usually spelled out one thing: boom. They'd get dragged straight back to its nest, so the chicks would tear them apart for dinner. She refused to let that happen, and the second their altitude dipped, she planned her escape. But Little realized the bird was acting like something more than just a bird. Like it was. It looks like they're barreling straight for the elf village. Mythia suddenly clocked it. This was exactly where Ishua was right now, even with the king's rules still tightening everything around them. Coming in this way was unavoidable, and the two of them couldn't help but share a quick, light laugh at the thought. Mythia figured it out fast. If that bird was this huge, its nest had to be lurking somewhere close to the world tree. She also clocked that the world tree's condition looked straight up grim. As soon as he reached the tree, they spotted the group in trouble and bolted over, ready to jump in and help right away. Mythia surged forward, parried every incoming strike with her blade, then snapped her sword through the monsters. She lunged from the side, smacked foes with her staff, and blasted magic to wipe them out. As Arya watched their clash unfold, she could see it. Over the last few weeks they'd sharpened to a deadly rhythm, hitting faster, wasting less, and still keeping their mana under control. Diana watched it unfold and couldn't believe it. Alan had all those strong companions, Yet he still fumbled this badly. Little hurled a mana potion at Arya, practically begging her to drink it, and Arya gladly took it. Grateful, Diana urged everyone to stay sharp and not lag, then kept swinging her blade, carving through monsters as they swarmed. Mithia stared at the fight, stunned by the sheer skill on display, and blurted out a question in disbelief. Who was that swordswoman? Right then, Lillian dropped down from above and crashed into the fight. Tearing into the chaos with her, he blasted fire magic so hard it scorched the nearby monsters clean out of existence, leaving everyone stunned and wide-eyed. He froze in shock, staring at the same Lillian everyone whispered about, the one who'd already crushed one of the 4 heavenly kings. Lillian pointed out that the mana holes were already in place, and right now, Ishua was pouring mana into them to wipe out the miasma. There was only a tiny bit left. Arya took it in and zeroed in on keeping the line unbroken. The 5 of them pressed onward, hammering back the monsters and holding the line while Joshua kept his eyes locked on the world tree, pouring everything he had into bringing it back to life. Just moments before, Ishua and Lillian finished their work on Yggdrasil. One of the elves snapped to it. Those falling leaves had started to lose speed, like something invisible was tugging them mid-air. Ishua checked the manholes and saw there were already enough, then decided the miasma's erosion must have finally quit. Then he snapped his focus to Lillian, telling her to jump in and help the others, so she rushed off without hesitation. Ishua pressed his palms to the tree again, eyes locked on the next job he had to choke the miasma with opposing mana. Then shoved the tree's lost circulation back into motion. The elves watching snapped into shock, because even after conjuring all those magic circles, Ishua still managed to pour a massive wave of mana into the world tree. Queen Chelsea couldn't believe her own eyes. His magical power was blowing past even hers, the elf leader, and she knew that if he kept up this pace, he managed to spread mana through the whole tree branches, leaves, every inch without even stressing a single limb. She silently echoed his name in her head, Asquesk, and her eyes lit up with pure, deep admiration. Still locked in, Ishua felt the mana returning bit by bit, circling back through him, inching closer to full restoration with every breath. Soon, one of the elves felt something shift the leaves, stopped drifting down. Another elf realized it wasn't just that. Fresh green leaves burst back onto the tree at breakneck speed, thanks to Yggdrasil's natural regenerative power, fully reignited, and the tree shot back to life in a blink. Queen Chelsea was. He was flooded with relief, and it felt like fresh life was surging out of Yggdrasil and into his veins. Meanwhile, at the gate, Diana, Mithia, Little, Arya, and Lillian kept hammering back wave after wave of incoming enemies. They locked into a coordinated formation and shoved the monsters back together, and as the fight dragged on, the miasma in the air finally started to thin out. Lillian told them the falling leaves had finally stopped and the world tree's purification was back online, while Diana, still driving the fight, urged everyone to hold out just a little longer. They kept their ground and fought the enemies head-on, pushing forward with every breath. Right as the monsters' moves started to crawl, they suddenly clocked something weird. Right after that, the monsters suddenly started pulling back, like they couldn't hold their ground anymore. Little only caught on when the purification function came back then. The strength drained out of them, forcing them to fall back. Arya felt it in her own thoughts and asked herself for proof. If that was happening, then the world tree really had been saved. Diana nodded in full agreement, and you could practically feel the victory behind her words. Relief surged through them as they dug in their heels and fought to defend the area. Back at the world tree, Queen Chelsea hit the scene. She wrestled with the perfect way to thank Ishua. While Ishua barreled toward the final step, a glowing magic circle snapped into existence, then someone set it right into the tree. With that, the tree fell into place, and the world tree finally turned into pure serenity, enshrouded by blinding, glowing runes that lit up the whole place. Chelsea stared in disbelief as Ishua explained that these circles were basically a vault for light attribute mana ready to come in clutch later if the purification function ever hit its limit again. Queen Chelsea stared ahead, realizing just how far Ishua would go to fight for them. Before the moment could move on, Arya suddenly blurted out loud as she and the others came back from the fight. She lunged forward and hugged Ishua tight. And before the embrace even settled, Ishua snapped into action, checking her over like he couldn't stand the thought of a single scratch. Gratitude flooded his heart for Lillian and Diana, because he could feel every ounce of their effort. Then, Ishua's eyes widened in shock as he spotted Mythes and Little, his former party members. Mithya surged forward and wrapped him in a hug too, while Little bristled on Arya's behalf, convinced that moment was downright unfair. Ishwa never once saw it coming. Those two actually showed up to help. Mithya felt it was only natural they showed up, especially since Ishwa was the reason, and she even admitted the truth was still a secret. They'd only been brought there by a bird by sheer coincidence, just like that. And Queen Chelsea turned to Ishwa, calling him a mana-porter as she sized him up. She looked at him like a savior who dropped into the elven village from nowhere. And she knew it wasn't just him. Diana, Lillian, Arya, Little, and Mithya, each and every one of them were finally recognized as a truly remarkable group. Ishwa straight up told her it wasn't even a real party, just this weird coincidence that they all happened to be there at the exact same time. But Queen Chelsea couldn't shake the feeling. It was hard to believe, because the way they moved together felt like they'd been working side by side for years. Even the elven village wasn't the only thing saved by the time preparations kicked off. The whole region was pulled back from disaster, kicked off that night's celebration, and before anyone knew it, it snowballed into a full-blown grand festival. Cheers burst through the air as the whole village praised their saviors. Then they lined up their best ingredients and brewed special bottles of sake just for the moment. Joy exploded through the crowd as people danced, clinked drinks, and dug into the feast together. Far off, Queen Chelsea and Ishwa murmured to each other. She admitted that even without Alan landing the final strike, she'd been convinced Yggdrasil was doomed to fall, and now, with it actually happening, the whole result feels unreal. Ishwa stared at her like he finally understood, because in his mind, she wasn't just the elven village queen anymore. She was the world tree's guardian, shouldering a crushing fate as it teetered on the edge of destruction. Queen Chelsea swallowed her pride, lowered herself, and told Ishwa she'd help him any time he needed, promising her full support. Ishwa urged her to lift her head and continue. She replied that the festival she'd been planning was already more than enough for him. Queen Chelsea met his gaze with a soft, knowing smile, instantly seeing how selfless he truly was. Nearby, Arya dove into the celebration, letting the alcohol fire her up as she vowed to keep going until every last drop of her fruit wine was gone. The elves erupted in cheers for Arya, stunned that a saintess could down alcohol like a pro, praising her drinking talent to the skies while Ishwa watched, noting how the drink tasted sweet and slid down easy, even though it packed a punch, as Arya lifted it and chugged straight from a mug. Arya swore that, as a saint, she could cleanse all drunkenness and insisted she wasn't affected at all until she asked the question and realized she was already wobbling with signs of getting drunk. Arya brushed it away and zeroed in on what mattered. She clinked drinks with Ishwa, then yanked him into yet another tight embrace, leaving Ishwa completely stunned. Across the room, Lillian looked wrecked, tossed in her own thoughts, desperately confused why her feelings couldn't reach Ishwa, while Diana demanded to know who let Lillian slip alcohol in the first place. Lillian launched into an over-the-top act, convinced even a hero like her could still get hated, and with her drink clutched in hand, she stumbled forward right as Diana fought to rein her in, while Ishwa clocked that the mess at their table was exploding into full-blown chaos. He and Diana locked eyes, and the tension between them snapped tight, each stuck with their own intoxicated mess of a companion. When the night finally faded, morning broke, and Ishu's crew got ready. Then they were about to hit the road. Right nearby, trapped inside a cage, Alan was grumbling and blasting his complaints into the air. He couldn't stomach the treatment he was getting, even while he kept insisting he was the hero. One of the elves flat out refused to call Alan a hero. She swore he tried to wreck their village, and she even compared him to a demon. Mithya backed the elf's idea and, to her, a cage was pointless, just break his legs already. Alan's face snapped into rage. Ishwan knew he had to run to the king, but Alan just kept trying to slip away, defiant to the bone, refusing to accept any of it even after everything that already happened. Right as the group piled into the carriage, Ishwa snapped that they'd swing by Nabish first before charging off to the royal capital. Queen Chelsea waved them off with a heartfelt wish that they'd come back someday, and Ishwa grinned, soaked in how fun the festival was, and promised he'd return again. And just like that, the whole crew tore off together, sprinting back toward Nabish. After a while, they finally rolled back into Nabish, the newcomer's town, and stormed straight into the Adventurers Guild. Inside, the receptionist let out a wave of relief when she saw Ishwa was totally unhurt, and she confirmed he'd managed to rally back up with the others. Then she confessed the elf village situation had turned brutal, and she admitted she had no clue how to properly apologize for the mess her actions caused. Ishwa shot back calm and collected, saying she could finally see it. Everyone was safe, and he promised he'd rush to report every detail of the quest right away. Then the receptionist snapped into disbelief after hearing the full report, because the monsters had turned even more vicious, all thanks to the world tree finally starting to fail, and somehow, that crew didn't just bring down a S-rank subspecies of the Ogre King, they straight up restored the world tree itself too. She snapped into serious mode and demanded to know who Ishua really was. And Ishua only said the same thing again, even if you pressed him on who he truly saw himself as nothing but a run-of-the-mill mana porter. But the girls behind him shot him knowing looks like no way, because they could tell he was anything but ordinary. Then the receptionist warned that what started as a simple thank you request couldn't stay that way anymore. The results demanded a massive reward boost, but Ishua flat out refused, saying he hadn't done anything special, and that even the first promised 30 gold coins already felt way too much. The receptionist praised his humility, even though he'd pulled off results worthy of a hero while Arya watched, realizing Ishus truly thought he'd done nothing special, and that thought alone rattled her. In the end, even after everything, the receptionist decided the request was finally done, slammed the stamp on the paper, and Lillian stepped up right after to deliver her report. The receptionist clocked the rising hero Lillian beside Ishua, the guy with SSS-level magic, and blurted out that she wants to see that kind of power couple for herself. Outside, Alan was shouting at the top of his lungs, demanding to be set free. Then the whole group stormed out, and the receptionist snapped that, unlike the hero, there was Alan, and right now, he was locked inside a cage. Alan kept yelling, claiming the four of them were part of his hero party and demanding everyone credit their victories like they were his own. Behind Alan's back, the other guild members snapped into action saying Alan was the one who banished them, then pushing harder with the truth that he'd almost killed the world tree and wondering if he was really trying to start a war with the elves. Ishwa suddenly realized maybe it would have been smarter to keep Alan outside the city all along. And Mathia backed it up with a sharp take. Alan needed to feel some discomfort after nearly leaving her to die in an A-rank dungeon. And it was obvious Little wasn't just talking. She was holding a real grudge. Ishua said the only move left was to ride straight to the royal. Then he races straight to the royal capital and spills every detail to the king. Later, deep inside the royal capital's castle, the king met them with open arms, welcoming their return like it was the best sight in the world. He told everyone he'd already heard how the incident ended, courtesy of an emissary the elven queen, Chelsea, sent straight to him. But he couldn't shake the confusion about why Alan went solo and somehow managed to make everything worse. Arya broke it down. Alan had tossed Iswa out of the party, and that one move made her and the others immediately doubt him. So they packed up and left too. The king snapped at Alan with pure rage, and Alan shot back at Arya, furious that she'd exposed everything he'd been doing. The king shut Alan up on the spot, then snapped his focus to Ishua, demanding a clear confirmation. Ishua nodded and told it straight Alan had kicked him out of the party, sneering that someone who could only sling mana was useless. The king snapped that all this reasoning was pure foolishness. He admitted the holy sword was a one-of-a-kind power meant for a hero, but said it was the only thing Alan had, and reminded everyone that their entire party's shape only came to life because Ishua's brains and mana held everything together. Mithia finally snapped, saying Alan had spun lies about Ishua leaving on his own, then dragged the rest of them into an A-rank dungeon like it was nothing then. Little added the real horror, when things turned deadly. Alan tried to shove Mithia aside and sacrifice her just to get away. The king took one look at it and finally got it. Alan was already alone by the time the king sent him to investigate the world tree. Alan's words finally clicked. He'd been tricked, and Alan had totally deceived him. Alan tried to explain, but the royal herald cut him off and slammed the issue shut, and the king backed that call on the spot. Then the king slammed the decision down and declared Alan would get stripped of his hero status. Alan snapped back with raw urgency, insisting he wasn't done yet and that he'd come roaring back. Then he snapped his focus to Ishua, trying to pull him and the rest back in. He forced his way back into the party, determined to hit reset and start over for real. Mithia snapped back, grilling him like, "What's the point of dragging up an idea like that right now?" Arya stepped in like nothing was wrong, told Alan it was fine, and challenged him to prove he was a real hero by getting back up and becoming a successful adventurer. Again, while behind her, Mythia and Little felt the same chill twist in the air. Arya's gentle smile stayed right where it was, but something darker lurked under it. Alan suddenly wondered if this meant he had to hit the reset button and start his adventurer life all over from the very beginning. The king snapped him straight, saying the hero title was stripped because he couldn't step up and grow in his own role, and the truth that he'd sparked a full-blown crisis between the kingdom and the elves. He tried to bolt anyway, even though his duty to report the incident was breathing down his neck, and he fed the crown straight-up lies, false reports, day after day, and the whole thing was treated as a set of serious crimes. So the king slammed down his verdict. Alan was branded a criminal, and that scar would haunt him for the rest of his life. Alan snapped with rage the second they branded him a criminal, realizing the verdict was totally unfair. Before he could even catch his breath, the guards grabbed him and dragged him away. Later, the king snapped for Ishua's attention, but Ishua couldn't shake his worry for Alan. The king praised how he handled the recent chaos as downright admirable, then told him, "If you've got any wishes, speak them now." Ishua waved off the praise with a humble shake of his head, basically saying, "I don't deserve this. I've already gotten my reward from the guild." Then the royal herald pitched a deal: give Ishua a domain and a noble title. And the king snapped, "Great idea." But when it came down to being an aristocrat, Ishua hesitated, like he couldn't quite believe what was being offered, while Arya couldn't stop herself from saying what a wild chance this was, reminding everyone that a commoner can't rise into aristocracy unless something insane happens. Ishua thanked the king and asked him to take nothing but Ishua's respect. The girls circling him went wide-eyed at his refusal. Ishua nodded, admitting it was an insane honor. But then he leaned in and made it clear. They weren't here to be treated like legends. They were adventurers, and he vowed to keep climbing higher on that same road, because for him, traveling with Arya and the others felt like the best ride of his whole life. The king nodded, fully owning his choice, and then he passed along his. His support lit the way for Ishua's journey ahead. Then Ishua and all the girls set off, leaving everything behind. Diana then pressed Lillian for her next move, grilling her about whether she planned to run back out there with just the two of them again. Diana told Lillian that if she wanted to team up with Ishua, this was the perfect opening right, after they'd fought side by side, yet the plan to help in a tough moment flipped on them, and they wound up being saved instead. Lillian caught that truth instantly and realized this was finally her chance. As Lillian got ready to march up to Ishua and bring the whole thing up, she steadied her nerve. Matthias lunged forward again, demanding right to his face that he be allowed into their party with Little. Lillian shot to attention at this sudden twist. Ishua let out a shocked laugh, stunned that the two of them were supposed to be in crazy demand. Yet they still chose to follow him. Mythia insisted with full conviction that Ishua was truly exceptional, and that if he stood with them, he'd carve his name into history. Then she added that his manna felt soft, warm, and strangely comforting. Ishua snapped back that Mythia, and even the king, were all blowing it out of proportion. But then he admitted, with a grin, that he'd be genuinely thrilled if both of them joined his party. Then Diana leaned in and practically begged Lillian to seize the moment. Lillian finally stepped up, and he pushed to get added to the issue too, like, "Put me in the party as well." Ishua, Arya, Mythia, and Little got completely blindsided by her sudden request. Diana said the way Lillian put it sounded just like a little girl inviting someone to play. Ishua hesitated, flicking through Lillian's terrifying reputation in his mind. He'd heard she'd wiped out Ifrit, one of the 4 heavenly kings, running straight on the Demon King's orders, and that lit a belief in him. If someone like her could pull that off, she had to be strong enough to build a party with the best fighters and choose them freely. Diana cut in, grilling that entire line of thinking until it cracked. During our stay at the elf village, she told me she'd become absolutely convinced that Gathor, pulling together a crew that talented, was anything but easy. Ishua shot a look at Arya, and Arya nodded, praising Lillian as a real hero, nothing like Alia. Alan stepped in, and she threw her support behind the idea. Ishua took that in, and then he snapped to a decision. Right after that, the 4 of them dropped to their knees and shouted that they were joining Lillian's party. Lillian gasped in shock, because this whole mess flipped on its head, and it turned out she was the one who'd wanted to join Ishua's party in the first place. Ishua then broke it down. If a hero's in a party, they're meant to naturally step up and lead. Lillian's confidence crumpled as panic rose, and she spun toward Diana, utterly lost on what to do next. Diana told him, "If this is the way you've been thinking, then just accept it and move on." Ishwa snapped again, reaffirming the formation with zero doubt. He started naming them one by one: the mana porter Ishwa, the saintess Arya, and the magic swordsman Mithia, the sage Little, the sword saint Diana, and hero Lillian, three legends colliding in one blazing story. And just like that, a brand new hero party burst into existence. Meanwhile, deep inside the Demon King's castle, a ruthless scheme started to form piece by piece, like it was about to explode. Ifrita, the four heavenly kings, savage one snap that they needed to surge forward exactly like they planned. Undyne, one of the four heavenly kings, snapped at him, saying his thoughts were as basic as his strength, then threw the real punchline at him. He'd just been beaten by a hero. Ifrita fired back at Undyne, saying her own plan crashed in spectacular defeat. But Undyne insisted her strategy was flawless, at least in theory, leaving the fourth member still to be revealed. Heavenly Kings. Sylphie backed the plan hard, claiming that flooding the world tree with an insane dose of miasma to break it down, then striking for real to wipe out the elven village and turn it into a launch pad for the next invasions, it turned out to be a damn good plan. Gnome, one of the four heavenly kings, said he'd been dead sure his ogre king, just another of his subspecies, would be more than enough to crush the young hero Lillian. Undine then hit everyone with the bombshell. Ishwa's presence was totally unexpected, like cheating, while Ifrita watched him swat away the miasma with zero effort, and Sylphie couldn't even figure out how he slipped into the hero's barrier at all. And Gnome drove it home one more time, because Ishwa didn't just handle the threat, he wiped out the miasma that had spread across the entire world tree. After hearing it all, a new voice snapped, doubting anyone could be human and pull off powers like that, and that voice was the Demon King. Undine snapped to it, saying it was his mana reserves and the insane control he had over them that made him absurdly powerful, and Sophie guessed that was exactly why hero Lillian picked him. Gnome nodded, realizing this meant things were about to get brutally troublesome. Rita snapped that tricks were over and they'd have to smash forward with brute force, and the Demon King nodded along, admitting it made perfect sense. As the four heavenly kings leaned in to listen, the Demon King pressed on, insisting that even a straight-up clash meant they couldn't afford to burn strength, because since their enemy was the hero's party, he decided to throw a different human hero at them instead. Undine had to ask the scary question: was there even a hero out there who'd team up with them? And the Demon King nodded like, yeah, that option absolutely exists. Then the Demon King snapped open a screen showing Alan, like a doom-laced spotlight, and rage burned in him. And that mark on his body wouldn't let him take on a single real quest. Consumed by frustration, Alan snapped his resentment straight at Ishwa. So the Demon King pitched a brutal idea: drag that fallen hero right into their ranks.